Good evening, dear listener. As you settle in for the night, let your shoulders grow heavy and your breath find a slower rhythm. There is nothing you need to do, and nowhere else you need to be. Whenever you're ready to drift off, I'll be here speaking softly, like quiet talk by a low fire guiding you through small corners of the past where ordinary hands did careful work. Tonight, let's quietly explore for gentle stories. First, we'll visit the high Andes and sit beside a keeper of cords, where memory is tied into strands of wool and cotton, and numbers travel by touch. Then we'll follow running water to Samarkand, where mulberry bark becomes paper, sheet by patient sheet, in a courtyard cooled by shade and stone. After that, evening will open in a gaslight city, and we'll walk a slow route with a lamplighter as glass globes wake one by one. Finally, we'll step into an early morning alley in Edo, where night soil workers keep a tidy cycle between town and field, turning yesterday's leavings into tomorrow's harvest. Calmly and without fuss. If your eyes wish to close, let them. If your thoughts wander, that is welcome. These stories move at a sleepy pace, with soft edges and simple seams. Together we'll be gently uncovering the past, listening for small sounds, noticing steady motions and, if you like, drifting into rest along the way. Morning arrives, high in the Andes as a pale ribbon along the ridge. Frost loosens its hold on straw roofs. Thin light settles on walls the color of baked earth. Inside a quiet storehouse, a low table waits with a bundle of cords laid out like calm rain. The keeper sits on a woven mat. A wool cloak rests across his shoulders. His hands warm themselves by rubbing a strand between finger and thumb until the twist remembers to relax. Before him lies a main cord, stout and even, stretching from left to right. From it pendant cords hang in soft lines, some of cotton pale as bone, some of wool, dyed with gentle colors that the eye learns to read: brown for grain, blue for cloth, red for labor, the soft green for herds. Each pendant holds small knots. Some knots lie close together, some spaced by a thumb or two. They look modest and undecorated, but under the keeper's fingers they become a story. He opens a small pouch and removes a bone gauge smoothed by use. It is not a ruler, it is a reminder of distance. He places it on the table to the right of the cords. A gourd with a wooden stopper holds dye powder for marking ends. A twist of raw fiber waits to become a repair if a strand has thinned. Nearby sits a shallow bowl with a little water in it. When the air is dry, the keeper touches the water lightly, and then the cord, to keep stray fiber from lifting under his skin. The room is cool. Outside, a llama coughs, then settles. The keeper breathes through his nose and closes his eyes for a moment, not as ceremony, only to bring his attention into his hands. His left hand cradles the main cord, his right walks along a pendant and stops where knots begin. He pinches the first knot and rolls it gently. It is a long knot, a little ladder of wraps, tied to tell of single counts. Below it, a cluster of small, tight knots separate, deliberate, speak in tens and hundreds. A side note belongs softly here. Quipa knots carried value by position, not just by number. And not higher mental larger placed ends above ones. Hundreds above tens, so the cord became a column that the fingers could read. He begins today's first tally with maize. The storehouse behind him keeps its smell-dry sweetness and dust. He has walked those baskets already, tracing circles with his palm over their lids, and listening to how grain moves inside when shifted. Now he reads the maze cord and thinks of today's count. He feels the lowest knot, 7. The next place holds nothing. The place above that, 2. 7 ones, no 10s, 200s, 207. He says the number low in his throat, once anchoring it, and then touches the bone gauge to the pendant at the place where he will add. He lifts the maze pendant free with the care you might offer to a thread through a needle's eye. He does not untie today's knots. He leaves them as they are and ties new ones below at a small distance. His fingers form a long knot, one wrap at a time, and snug it down with the nail of his thumb. He counts wraps in a murmur. He ties a second for 10s. Today a single tight knot placed one finger width above. He checks spacing with the edge of the bone gauge. He does not rush. When he finishes, the new group sits just below a narrow strand he added last month. Together they will later be pressed into one summary when the week turns. He sets the maze cord down and reaches for the cord of cloth. Blue wool catches the light at its twist. Cloth counts move differently than grain. They include types. One pendant for simple mantles, one for sleeved tunics, one for belts. He slides until he finds the belt cord, where knots are few and light. Belts finished this month must be added 9, all from a village down the road where looms stand under eaves. He ties a long knot with 9 wraps, pausing at 4 and at 7 to let his fingers rest. He breathes. The room breathes. The knot sits honest and true. A runner pauses at the door, bare feet silent on the threshold. The keeper looks up and smiles with his eyes. On the runner's shoulders small bag hangs, its mouth tied. He sets it down, draws out a short, newly made cord no thicker than a shoelace and lays it on the mat. It carries only a main line and 3 pendants, each with a knot group at the lower end. The runner speaks simply, from the terrace above the river. Potatoes lifted to terraces, beans won, the ditch is clear. The keeper nods, his fingers rest the new cord over the appropriate pendant on his larger quipu. He will translate this small message into today's editions. Beans to stores, potatoes to be dried. Attention to the ditch next week. The runner drinks to mouthfuls of water, ties his bag, and is gone. Movement here is unforced, like breath between senses. The keeper takes a small piece of red wool and loops it around the pendant that needs attention, the irrigation note. He does not tie a knot. The red loop is a reminder that will travel with the cord until the work is done. Side note, for a little context, colors in this language are not decoration. They work as headings and flags. They whisper categories to the fingers. Red can speak of labor, of tasks owed and tasks completed, just as blue can stand for cloth, and brown for grain, varying by place and habit. Mid-morning lifts the chill. A strip of sunlight finds the floor. The keeper turns the quipu so light stays on his hands, but not in his eyes. He moves to the herd cords. A soft green indicates camelids, llamas, and alpacas kept in nearby folds. He slides along to the pendant marked last season for breeding count. Below its old hundreds knot he ties a quiet addition, one long knot for a birth reported at dawn. He sets it with care so a future reader will feel no confusion where today's mark meets last month's. He strokes the cord once to lay the fiber smooth. Sometimes, in a pause, he reviews. He holds the main cord near its left end and lets pendants drape over his wrist like a fringe. One by one he touches a pendant's start, notes its color, weight, and the small loops or ties that mark its meaning. Memory rises like the gentle steam from a cooking pot. He can say without looking, Nays 207 plus today's, cloth belts 9, ditch flagged red, heard one more. Quipu can be read aloud, but the keeper mostly reads inward, mothing only the places where numbers meet tasks. He sets the quipu back on the table and smooths the mat with his palm. Outside, a breeze touches the door hanging. A child laughs in the courtyard and then forgets why. The keeper places the bone gauge across the last pendant he changed and leaves it there, a sign to himself that this is where he will gather the week's ties into a summary when the cycle turns. He returns the dye-gourd stopper, rinses his fingers in the shallow bowl, and dries them on the edge of his cloak so oils from skin won't travel into fiber. Before midday he will walk the storage baskets again, one row of lids, one set of footsteps, the same patient path. He will carry the quipu with both hands, not to honor it as an object, but to keep its cords from tangling. At the doorway he will lift it slightly so the pendants hang free and straighten themselves by their own weight. In that gentle hanging, knots and colors settle, and the story becomes easier for the next reading by his hands tomorrow, or by another keeper's hands on a far day. For now, he ties the main cord's left end to a peg on the wall, letting the pendants fall like a waterfall of quiet thread. The room holds its soft cool again. The work has been simple, careful, and enough for this hour. By late morning the courtyard outside the storehouse has warmed to a steady kindness. Sun lies along one wall in a clean band, the opposite side keeps a comfortable shade. The keeper lifts the quipu from its peg with both hands so the pendants can hang and straighten. He gives the whole a small, practiced shake, no more than a breath, so twists remember to point the same way. Chords answer by finding their own level. Footsteps arrive without hurry. Two visitors come from neighboring terraces, one with a short cord wander on his wrist, the other carrying a small basket. Greetings are made in the quiet style of people who share work. A nod, a palm briefly raised, a glance toward the cool doorway. The first unwinds his message cord and lays it on the mat. The second sets down the basket and opens it to show 6 smooth stones and a measuring string blackened at regular intervals. The basket says, "We counted with care." The stones say, "We will remember while we speak." The keeper sits where sun meets shade so his hands have light and his eyes do not tire. He places the visitor's cord across the master quipu near the pendant that holds grain for their hamlet. With his left hand he follows color and weight to the right place. With his right he tests knot type and spacing on the small cord. The numbers are simple, 3 10s and 4 1s placed a day below last week's tally. He ties a new long knot for 4 on the appropriate pendant, then a single tight knot a finger above to mark the 30. Each knot settles under his thumbnail with a small, agreeable resistance. He hums a fragment of tune without meaning. The visitors watch and do not need words to trust the process. They have seen these hands for seasons. From the basket, the 6 stones move one by one to a line at the mat's edge as each item is accounted. Maize, beans, a sack of dried peppers, a sack of salt arriving from the path over the ridge, a repair to a wall, and a promise to carry a load next market day. The measuring string with its soot mark stands for the length of ditch cleaned up river. The keeper loops a thin red thread around the irrigation pendant again, tighter this time, to say the work is in motion and not just planned. A side note belongs softly here. Such placeholder loops are part of the memory. They ride the quipu for days, then vanish when the task has met its hour. When figures are tied, the keeper lifts the visitor's cord to return it, nodding that it carries no debt. Sometimes he will keep a small cord as a receipt, hanging it from a peg until the season turns. Today, the men prefer to take theirs home. It will live on a wall near their storehouse door until next market. The stones slip back into the basket. A cup of warm maize drink is shared between 3 sets of hands, its steam a quiet companion. Then the visitors go, sandals whispering on the path. The room returns to its slow center. The keeper turns to the weeks, weaving the consolidation that keeps cords brief and numbers legible. He spreads the pendants for grain. At the lower ends lie fresh long knots and single tight ones tied these last days. Above sit the older places, tens, hundreds that hold the season's backbone. He chooses a maize pendant that has grown busy. With forefinger and thumb, he slides the newest knots gently upward until they meet the last quiet gap. He leaves them there while he unties a higher long knot and readies it as a single tight knot one place above, growing tens into hundreds with the calm of someone moving stones from one bowl to another. Then he strokes the free space below with 2 fingers, making room for new days to arrive. The long knot that marked this week's ones dissolves and returns as a small memory in his hand. He rubs it into nothing, and the fiber assumes its plain twist. A side note softly, in some traditions, counting cords favored tidy faces. Additions were gathered into larger places so fingers could read quickly. The week's breath was always clear. Outside, a breeze combs the courtyard. The keeper stands, carrying the quipu over one arm, and steps into the band of sun. Light shows him what shade conceals, loose fibers that might catch later, the sheen that says a cotton pendant has rubbed against a wool neighbor, the slight difference between a cord spun in one direction and a cord spun in the other. He notes these with his eyes, but does not speak to them. His hands will answer with a gentle pinch when he returns inside. A quiet aside fits here. Some quipu makers gave meaning to twist and ply cords turned one way or its opposite to sort categories or confirm a reading. The keeper feels these as texture more than rule. They help his memory stand upright. He lets the pendants fall freely and watches how wind treats them. Those that have grown heavy drift less, the light ones swing and settle. If a pendant crosses its neighbor's path too easily, he will widen their tie on the main line by the width of a thumbnail so reading later will not tug and tangle. Today only one asked for that kindness. He teases its lashing loose, shifts it a little, and tightens the small binding again. The adjustment takes as long as a long exhale. A child wanders by with a reed flute and a serious look. He stops at a respectful distance and peers at the colored cords. The keeper crouches and offers the end of a harmless, undecorated string for the child to touch. The child rubs the twist between 2 fingers and looks surprised that numbers can feel like cloth. The keeper smiles, and with his other hand taps 3 times on the floor, then touches 3 raised raps on a long knot so the child can match sound to thing. The child nods, satisfied with the idea that counting can ride both air and fiber, and goes on to investigate a beetle crossing a sunny stone. Back inside, the keeper makes the week's small summary on a separate pendant tied for that purpose near the main cord's left end. He does not rewrite the whole. He ties a single compact knot at the place of tens or hundreds, depending on the scale, and loops around it a small color that stands for maize brown, so anyone who reads his summary will know which family it serves. Beside it he adds a thin loop for cloth output blue and another for labor flags red with no numbers yet, only the promise that the account will be there when the cycle closes. He strokes these loops flat so they do not climb. Noon edges nearer. The sun's band has moved. The wall that was bright now rests. The quipu returns to its peg for a breath while the keeper tiddies tools, bone gauge to pouch, digord stopper checked, water bowl refreshed, the small repair fiber twisted more tightly so it will not stray. He takes the master cord down once more and lays it across his forearms like a stole. With the light now at his back, he reads down the line pendant by pendant, letting knots rise to meet his fingertips. He speaks a few numbers under his breath to knit the sequence in his mind. 231, 9 belts, 1 berth, ditch begun. He does not chase perfection. He seeks clarity. Clarity helps sleep later. Before the meal he carries the quipu to the storehouse door and stands for a moment where he can see both the baskets and the hills. Wind shifts the fringe. Sun draws small shadows under each wrap. The cords glow a little. The keeper, satisfied that the week has a shape, returns inside and sets the master line across its pegs. The pendants settle as threads do when left alone, arranged by gravity and habit, ready for the next touch. After the noon meal the air thins into a pleasant hush. A long room opens to the courtyard, its roof held by round posts stained by years of smoke. Mats lie into comrows. At the far end a low hearth keeps water warm without insisting on notice. This is where the elders meet people whose fingers remember soils, terraces, and seasons. The keeper enters with the master quipu folded over his forearms so the pendants hang freely and do not learn creases. He sets it on a mat in the center and eases the main cord straight with 3 light passes of his palm. The elders sit without ceremony. A woman whose nails are short from weaving rests near the green pendants. A man whose shoulders slope from carrying loads settles by the cords that speak of llamas and roads. Another, who minds irrigation, places himself where the red marker loop now waits. No one takes a place by rank, they sit where memory will be useful. The keeper nods once and draws the quipu slightly toward the light so hands will see. Listening begins in the palms. The woman weaver lifts the maize pendant and lets knots move beneath her thumb. She does not count aloud. She lets places speak, ones at the end, 10s above, 100s above that, and pauses at the space the keeper left for this week's gathering. Her mouth makes a small shape that means she has recognized the number and is untroubled by it. She sets the cord down and reaches for the cloth pendant, where belts and mantles tell their totals. The man of loads strokes the green cords for camelids and smiles when a new birth rises to meet his finger. A herd's increase is a soft kind of good news. The keeper keeps silence until asked. An elder raises a brow slightly, a sign for say it to the rune. He answers with numbers as low as breath, not to replace the herd's truth, but to let ears and fiber agree. He adds a brief, useful word after each number, basketed, on the road for drying, flagged, and the elders incline their heads. A side note belongs gently here. Decisions in such places often live where several ways of knowing meet: hands on knots, eyes on baskets, a voice that measures, and feet that remember distances. When the reading is finished, they plan the week's path for tribute and sharing. The keeper brings out a plain cord with no knots and lays it on the mat in a shallow curve to stand for the ridge road. He places 3 shorter, darker cords across it for the paths that fall toward the terraces. Pebbles set for villages. Maize kernels for storehouses. A strip of red yarn moves to sit beside the upper path where irrigation needs attention. A strip of brown rests near the lower village that asked for cloth in last market's talk. This is not a map in the way makes one. It is a reminder, here, then here, then here, spread across the floor so bodies can see the order. Loads are agreed by handfuls rather than by long lists. The keeper cups his palm, and the carrier elder places 3 small stones in it, 3 loads of salt to go uphill on the second morning. He then places 2 stones on the mat beside the green cords to animals to return with wool from the high fold by the 3rd day. The irrigation elder lays a reed beside the red loop and breaks its tip to mark half a day's work at the bend. 2 more whole reeds lie for the straight section, 1 on either side of a pebble that stands for the small gate. Work divides itself into these modest tokens, and the map becomes a ledger everyone can see without reading. Now the travel quipu must be made small, exact, quick to consult in wind or dark. The keeper draws from his pouch a main cord no longer than his forearm. He lashes to it for pendants at generous spacing so fingers will not crowd. He chooses colors with quiet purpose, brown for grain, blue for cloth, green for camelids, red for labor. On the brown pendant he ties a compact set of knots, 200s, 3 10s, 1 230 plus 1 for the share to climb to the high store, today's figure softened to the week's plan. On the blue, he ties 9 in a single long knot belts to deliver by the lower path. The green receives a single long knot for 1 new birth to note a prage, so that a herdsman can be greeted with the news he expects. The red carries 3 small markers, spaced far apart, morning half-day at bend, afternoon at the straight, next dawn to confirm. To help the runner hold places in mind, the keeper adds small, polite signs. A thin tuft of llama hair lashes above the green knots. A scrap of old belt, blue-dyed, ties near the cloth count. A tiny, pale seed binds near the brown maize in suggestion, not in weight. None of this is decoration. It is a touch language for travel, so that at a breathless stop a hand can know this one without having to search. The runner arrives as the room has nearly finished its thoughts. He is not dramatic in entrance. He is careful not to jar the quiet. His sandals are dusty. A woven band crosses his chest. He kneels by the mat and places his hands in his lap. The keeper winds the small quipu once around the runner's left wrist and ties it with a flat knot that opens in a pull, then winds it once more around the runner's palm so it will not shift when he runs. He folds the tail back so the pendants lie along the wrist's inner side where skin can read them in motion. Before sending him, they practice as always. The keeper moves the runner's finger to the brown pendant and says the number and its meaning low. The runner repeats it as breath. Blue pendant, the runner repeats. Green, he repeats and touches the tuft. Red, he repeats and taps the places where the day will turn. The repetition is not a test, it is a calming. Cord muff and hand travel together more steadily than any one of them alone. A side note fits here like a small knot. In many places messages live double-tied on fiber, and tied in people so that one steadied the other when hills and ours did their shifting. The Chisqui rises and accepts a pouch with a little food, a twist of leaves for dryness in the mouth, and a strip of woven band in case a sandal strap asks for help. He bows with his head rather than his back, turns toward the door, and is gone first at a walk across the courtyard stones, then at the measured pace that the ridge teaches, fair and efficient. The elders tidy the floor map gently. Pebbles return to the basket, cords to their coil, the broken reed tip to the hearth where it will become next water's sweetness. The keeper gathers the master quipu over his arms and feels how its weight has changed by only a little. Outside, a line of clouds draws itself thin along the distant peaks. The afternoon will be clear. Before they part, the irrigation elder touches the red loop on the master cord, then nods toward the path. The keeper answers by moving the loop higher on the pendant, from plan to present, a small shift with a firm meaning. The woman weaver stands and, with the pad of her thumb, presses once against the cloth count. It is not a blessing, it is approval. In the quiet that follows the meeting, the keeper returns the master quipu to its pegs, then sits for a moment with his hands open on his knees. The room holds the soft sounds of a village day, the thud of a pestle far away, a bark that happens only once, wind folding itself against the door hanging and then forgetting. Numbers rest where they should. Paths are agreed. A cord has begun its small journey along the ridge. Late afternoon presses the light into longer shapes. The band of sun that crossed the courtyard in the morning now leans along the opposite wall. The keeper lifts the master quipu from its pegs and carries it to the doorway, where air moves without dust. He lets the pendants fall, then steadies them with a small shake so twist and ply settle. Today the work is not to add, but to agree cord to basket, not to wait memory to what the hands find. He starts with grain. Lids lie in a neat grid on the storehouse floor round woven, each with a dark loop for lifting. He chooses a gourd measure that this room trusts, a size everyone's wrists understand, and fills it from the first basket. The grain moves with a sound like dry rain. He watches how quickly the surface remembers its level after he pours back. He sets one pebble on the lid for each measure that would refill it, then checks the maize pendant. The places of tens and hundreds speak a number that feels right in the body. A side note belongs softly here. Many checks lived in the wrist and the ear if a count and a sound disagreed. Hands asked which one was being proud. At the cloth stack he lifts belts by thickness and finish, 9 made in the last weeks, as the quipu has said, each edge rubbed smooth with a pebble by the weaver's patient hand. He rolls one and sets it against the blue pendant's long knot, pressing the wraps lightly with a thumbnail as if to say hello. At the herd cord he listens for the pen's quiet talk on the hillside that coughs, and clicks a herdsman nose and touches the single long knot that marks the new birth. Breath, basket, beast all sing the same small note. Agreement, in such rooms, helps sleep later. On his way back through the pendants he feels a roughness where there should be none. One will cord brown, for grain has tired along its edge, dry air and many fingers have worried a thumb length to a faint halo. It is not rigid, but it is the kind of small thing that can grow. He sits on the mat and lays the cord against his knee. From the pouch he draws a twist of raw wool in the same family of color plant dyed last season with bark and thyme. He moistens his fingertips in the shallow bowl, then gently untwists the weary section, until 3 plies look apart but still friendly. He preps a new tuft to match the old, rolling it along his palm so its fibers learn the same direction of spin, the same patience of ply. Twist direction matters here. Some keepers let S and Z carry meaning, and even where meaning is modest, touch expects consistency. He overlays the new with the old for a few thumb widths, then rolls both together between palm and knee until the join forgets it is a join. A whisper of warmth and moisture help the wool choose one body. He smooths with the side of his hand and watches how light travels along the repaired place. It should move as if the cord were always so. Last, with a thread no thicker than a hair, he works a tiny whip around the pair to turns only to guard the splice without making a lump. Knots nearby are not disturbed, numbers remain themselves. A small shadow leans across the doorway. An apprentice stands there, serious and eager. She is old enough to braid a belt end square and young enough to be surprised by how quiet this room asks a mind to become. The keeper nods to invite her in and pats the mat beside the summary pendant near the main cord's left end. He places a short practice quipu in her hands, a palm-long main cord, 3 pendants spaced with kindness, 1 for maize, 1 for cloth, 1 for labor. The colors whisper their roles without needing mention. He begins with spacing rather than number. He lays the bone gauge at the base of a pendant and taps the place where a long knot should sit so that future fingers will not crowd it. "Leave a breath," he says in a voice that would not wake a dozing bird, and shows how a small gap keeps one from arguing with tens. She ties a long knot slowly, counting wraps in her muff. 1, 2, 3, 4. She tries to snug it with a tug. He stops her, smiling, and touches her thumb flat to press rather than pull. The knot spreads gently and sits like a pebble placed by a thoughtful hand. Next, tens. He guides her to tie a single tight knot a thumb above, then another above that to stand 4 hundreds on a different cord. He shows how tens and hundreds like to be aligned straight in their columns so that eyes and skin agree about place. He covers the knot with his fingers and asks her to read it blind. For ones, 110. She nods and repeats the reading back, the sound, and the thing beginning to braid inside her. Side note, as if said to a corner of the room, teaching here is often touch first. Words come later to explain what hands have already learned. They make a small summary together. He asks her to look at 3 practice basket-scored bowls with stones standing for measures and to tell the numbers with her palm. 6, then 2, then none. She ties 6 as a long knot on brown, presses it flat, leaves a breath, and ties 2 in tens because that is where they belong in another example. When she tightens too hard and makes a proud bump, he aunties it and lets her try again, guiding the pressure with the back of his nail against her thumb. The second knot lies calmer. He places her hands on the master quipu's summary pendant, lets her feel the small color loops near the knot, a brown for maize, a blue for cloth, a red for labor in motion, and explains that loops can carry the week's headings even when the number waits until evening. Footsteps find the courtyard. The runner returns with the day's dust on his calves and the travel quipu still around his wrist. He kneels on the threshold, breath even rather than loud. The keeper unwinds the cord and reads by touch. Brown 231 baskets to be shifted, met with 1 shortfall at the upper store. Blue 9 belts delivered. Green berth confirmed. Red half day at the bend finished. Straight run begun. Tomorrow for the gate. The red pendant has moved in his hand. He lifts the tiny marker at the first place to say done, slides the second upward a finger to show an hand, and leaves the third at its promise. The keeper thanks him with water and a pinch of leaves for the mouth. The runner drinks and smiles at the apprentice's practice cord. She looks down as if her knots might fly if seen. The keeper loops a thin red thread reel, knot practice around the labor pendant on the master quipu, and moves it from present to closing, a small slide inward on the cord near the main line. When tomorrow's gate work finishes, the thread will come off and rest in the pouch for reuse, nothing wasted if it can become a sign again. Evening leans closer. The light that remains is soft as unspun wool. The keeper and apprentice sit side by side and make the week's quiet gathering. He reads the day's small additions on the lower parts of the pendants and slides them gently up to meet their elders. Where ones have grown to a neat 10, he unknots and readies that place as a single tight mark above. Where 10s become hundreds, he lets the column learn its new height with his thumb as a level. The apprentice watches, then tries on the practice cord, moving long knots toward a space she leaves on purpose so a new place can be born above. Each motion is small, unhurried, and finish with a smoothing stroke that calms the fiber. Before they hang the master cord for the night, the keeper shows her how to read with closed eyes. He covers the summary with his hand and runs two fingers along the pendant. "Tell me maize," he says. She answers with a number halting at first, then queer. "Tell me cloth." She finds the bow loop near a single knot on another pendant and says it. "Tell me labor." Her finger meets the red thread in its new higher place. She explains it in 3 words: begun, nearly done. He nods and sets the quipu on its peg, pendants hanging long, free to forget any small twist they learned today while the room was busy. The storehouse cools. Someone passes outside with a jar. The sound of clay and reed lid is calm. The apprentice ties her practice cord around her wrist as the runner did, and grins at the feeling of numbers walking where a pulse lives. The keeper tiddies the bone gauge and returns the repair wool to its pouch. He brushes his hands together once, thoughtfully, and looks at the cord as if listening to it breathe. Night will carry the last of the day away. Tomorrow brings the week's finish the elders again. The irrigation loop slipped free, the master's summary tied in its careful place, and a small receipt cord made for a storehouse apridge. Morning returns with thin light along the lintel, and a cool that knows how to leave politely. The keeper takes down the master quipu and holds it between both hands so the pendants hang straight. He stands in the doorway long enough for the threads to remember their line. Behind him the storehouse smells of clean grain outside. A single bird writes a short note and is done. Today is a day for finishing. The elders will visit once more, not to argue totals, only to let numbers, tasks, and hands shake one another. Before they arrive, the keeper gathers to small things, a length of red yarn looped on itself the marker that says work in motion, and a handful of pale kernels to serve as reminders for a receipt. He places them on the mat beside the summary pendant, then sets a shallow bowl of water nearby so fingers can be made kind to fiber after dust. Footsteps, voices at a low height, then stillness. They settle, as they did earlier in the week, each by the chords they know best. The keeper eases the quipu toward the open light so reading will be easy on the eyes. He begins with a short speaking of what the hands already felt yesterday, stores as counted, belts as delivered, a birth among the animals, the ditch opened, and the straight run nearly so. The runner, who came in at dawn and waits by the door, adds to calm words, "Gate done." He lifts his wrist to show the small travel quipu. The red markers there have been moved to their final place. A quiet gesture invites the irrigation elder to free the task from the cord. The keeper pinches the red loop on the master pendant, slides it toward the main line, and lifts it clear. It rests in his palm for a heartbeat, then goes back to the pouch to serve again another week. Where the loop's at, there is no mark. The cord lies simple, as if it had always been waiting for that small absence. A side note belongs gently here. In work like this, completion often looks like subtraction, one thread taken off, a sign removed, leaving a surface that reads as calm. Now the week's summary is tied, not in haste and not in show. The keeper chooses the place near the left, and where such knots live. On the May's summary he turns last day's ones and tends into a single tight knot above, then lays a small brown loop beside it so anyone who reads will know its family in a glance. Cloth receives a modest long knot with a blue hinter on its throat. Labor gets no number now that the loop is gone. Instead he ties a simple ring knot just below the main line, a quiet sign that says this task passed and is willing to be forgotten. The herd line bears its one for the birth, moved up to sit with the season's 10 so the column reads true. The elders listen with their palms as much as with ears. Each touches the gathering knot for their part, and then presses the space below with a thumb to feel the room left for next time. The weaver smiles where the belt's tally sits smooth. The carrier nods to the green cord that will tell the high fold about the new young animal. The irrigation elder rubs a fingertip along the place where the red loop once sat and finds it clean. A small, traveling cord must be made now for the upper store, the one behind the ridge where baskets are tall and shadows brief. The keeper selects a fresh main line no longer than his forearm, and ties to it two pendants, brown and blue, nothing more. On the brown he forms a single compact knot for the week's maize sent upward. Then ties a small seed at the pendant's neck with a twist of fiber, the kind of sign that makes fingers smile before the eye. Decides a number. On the blue he places the 9 in a long wrap belts delivered, then threads a sliver of worn cloth through the lashing to show content without speaking. Between the pendants, a short loop of undyed cotton sits like a handle. It helps a reader hold the cord where the wind is confident. The girl who practiced yesterday kneels closer, serious again. The keeper hands her the receipt quipu so she can read it aloud, low and steady. Maize so many, belts so many. She checks her verb with a glance toward the elders. They incline their heads. He shows her the habit of rubbing the pendant's neck once with the pad of a finger after tying just enough to settle twist and keep future knots from climbing. She does careful and proud without being noisy inside. Baskets and cords greet one another one last time. At each store lid he sets a pebble aside for the measure that would return the basket to full. At each pendant he confirms that the places speak the same quiet sum. He does not chase the final grain. Good work ends with a breath between numbers and things, not with a fistful of tiny corrections. When all has agreed enough, the pebbles return to their sack. Their counting is complete for now. The runner takes the receipt quipu around his wrist as before, flat, not easy to open, and receives a blessing that is mostly a nod. He will carry it to the upper store before the long shadow crosses the ridge, then return with a strip of dyed thread tied to his own left cuff as acknowledgement. He leaves by the courtyard path, unhurried because he knows which stretches the wind favors and where to shorten his stride. There remains a gentle repair to the rune. The apprentice coils the practice cord and tucks it into a pouch the keeper has given her to be worked at home on quiet evenings. The bone gauge returns to its bag. The die-gorge stopper is pressed firm. The shallow water bowl is carried outside and poured along the edge of a bed where herbs will remember it tomorrow. The mat is shaken once, the dust rises, and then forgets to come back. The master quipu is read one last time for the week in a way that looks like rest. Hanging from its peg, pendants long end and troubled, it is read by walking to fingers down 3 chords only the summary, the cloth count, the herd then pausing at the main line to feel its thickness where additions were last earlier in the season. The keeper's hands thank the cord in that private waymakers and tools know. He lifts the quipu's left end, passes the main line around the peg twice to lie sure, and lets the fringe hang so gravity can do tomorrow's tidying overnight. Late light touches the courtyard and changes the clay wall into a warmer color. The elders rise and go by ones and twos. The apprentice lingers, runs a finger along the place where the red Luke used to live, and smiles at the notion that a small absence can mean a job well done. The keeper closes the door partway to keep the evening wind from muttering at the pendants, then sits on the step to watch the rage learn its evening outline. Numbers have become quiet again, paths have been walked, and will be walked. Hands that listened all week can rest when the meal smoke climbs and the bird writes no more notes. The keeper lifts his cloak around his shoulders and feels a simple satisfaction, not of pride but of fit, like a knot pulled flat so it will not rub. And now, leaving cords to sway in the cool of the storehouse, let's follow the sound of water through a shaded lane into a courtyard of vats and screams, where mulberry bark turns patiently into paper under steady hands. Morning opens the courtyard with a pale, even light. A narrow channel slips in under a low gate, murmurs along a stone lip, and slides away toward gardens. The sound is steady and polite, as if it knows its work. A mulberry tree leans over the wall, its leaves casting a small lace of shade across vats sunk half their depth into packed earth. The air smells faintly of wet fiber, clean plaster, and something green that might be bark remembering the branch. The mill wakes without haste. A door sighs. 2 workers step out, wrap their belts twice, and knot them flat so nothing dangles. Their shirts are simple and loose, their sleeves pushed back to the elbow with a practiced roll. One carries a bundle of pale strips, the inner bark of mulberry, scraped yesterday when shade reached the outer yard. The other lifts the lid from a long trough where bark has been soaking in a lime wash, the surface a quiet milk. A paddle slides along the trough and lifts one soft ribbon at a time. Water trails back from it in slow threads. They rinse each strip in the channel, letting the flow, and their fingers agree about what should leave. Lime that helped break bark's stubbornness drifts away toward fields, fiber stays. Laid in a shallow basket, the clean strips look like cooked noodles that never need heat. A friendly side note belongs here. Many places nursed paper from plant to page. In this corner of the world, mulberry learned to be polite when soaked, rinsed, and coaxed by steady hands. Rag would have done another job as well, but bark gives a tone the eye recognizes, somewhere between cream and moon. At the pounding block under a lean-to roof, a wooden mallet rests where it ended yesterday, The block surface bears shallow grooves like the memory of rain. The worker spreads a small cake of softened bark and begins to lift and fall the mallet. Not with show, but with rhythm. Tap, turn, tap, fold, tap. The mallet's face is wide, its edge gentled, it persuades more than it strikes. Fibers loosen, then separate, then part into a wet fluff that clings lightly to the block. Another cake joins it, the strokes repeat, a quiet pace unfolds. The second worker wets a clay jar and tips in a ladle of water bit by bit so the pulp stays drinkable, not pasty. A wooden rake with wide teeth draws through it to keep the mix honest. They work as if keeping time with distant footsteps. When enough pulp has turned to a smooth, soft slurry, they carry it to the vat. The vat is simple, a box of wood waxed against water, a few finger widths below the rim to make pouring comfortable, a sloped bottom so the last ladle gathers without complaint. One ladle of pulp and 3 of water go in, then the rake again long pulls front to back, side to side until the cloud looks even, no lumps hiding, no clear patches staring back. A slip of rice starch is added like a whisper, teaching fibers to hold hands when the water leaves. The surface remembers to shine. On a bench by the vat rests a pair of tools that look like a door, and it's framed for a very small house, mold and decal. The mold carries a fine screen stretched tight. The decal frames the edges so a sheet knows its boundary. The worker wets both in the channel, then gives them time to drip so the first sheet won't surprise itself with bubbles. He settles mold and decal together and holds them by their rails. The other worker steadies the vat with his palm on the far rim, a habit with no name, and the first dips. Arms enter the pulp at a shallow angle. The mold slides under, lifts, pauses. Hands move in a small figure 8 to level the fiber across the screen. Thighs and shoulders lend their steadiness. Water streams away in clear ropes. Pulp becomes a thin, even layer, the color of cream, thinking about sun. He looks along the surface as one might look along a board to see if it is straight. If the light shows high spots, he sways once more, and the sheet calms. The decal lifts with a soft sound. The first sheet rests on the mold like frost that forgot to be cold. Couching, the laying down begins. A felt lies on a low table, square and forgiving. The worker flips the mold in a single, decided turn so the new sheet meets the felt and stays. A smooth roll of the wrist persuades it to let go of the screen. The screen rises with a whisper. The sheet remains an even skin, willing to be another thing soon. A second felt covers it, another sheet will lie on that, a third felt will cover that, a small tower will grow felt, paper, felt, each layer generous to the next. The rhythm is comfortable, dip, level, lift, decal off, couch, cover, and again. At intervals, they stir the vat because fibers like to settle when no one looks. A ladle of pulp may join if the mixture thins. A side note stands politely nearby. Consistency is kindness in this craft. Sheets cut from the same vat should not quarrel on the writing board later, so hands repeat motions as if they were teaching the day a lullaby. Sun climbs one wall and leaves the other cool. A boy from the alley brings a teapot and 3 shallow cups. He sets them near the press where a screw waits for its turn to squeeze water. They drink in turns, 2 swallows each, and leave the rest for the next hour. Tea carries a little mint and a little earth. It suits a place where plant and water make something that can later hold words. When a stack of felt and sheets reaches the height of a forearm, They guide it under the press. The press speaks in wood and thread, the long screw turned by a crossbar, the platen coming down to sit like a polite visitor, pressure increasing with each slow sweep. Water climbs out of the stack, pushed from layer to layer, running along channels cut in the table edge to a jar that will water herbs against the far wall. The press does not groan. It is too well fed with oil and patience. The screw turns to a marked notch. No one tries to claim more pressure than the fibers wish to accept this morning. While the press works, they tend to drying. Along the wall, warm plaster receives sheets from yesterday, already a skin, not a puddle. One by one, they lift a corner with a knife so fine the sheet forgets it is being touched, then peel it from the wall with 2 hands. It makes a sigh like a page turned thoughtfully. The worker holds it to the light. A mild decal edge smiles along its sides. He taps 2 fingers under the sheet to test its firmness. Not brittle, not damp, pretty for its next kindness. Burnishing. On a low stool, a smooth stone sits in a cloth wrap. A sheet goes on a board. The stone travels in slow circles, pressing fibers to lie flatter, teaching the surface to be friendly to a reed pen. The motion is steady, the pressure even, the sound a soft, dry hush. If today's sheets are meant for brushes rather than pens, pressure eases. Too much polish would make the ink skate and sulk. A thin wash of gelatin may visit another stack later, brushed on in 2 undermatic coats to keep letters from bleeding. Choices live here in touch, sizing for firmness, burnish for shine, restraint for those who like their page to breathe. By late morning the first pressed stack comes free, felts laid aside in a friendly pile, new sheets lifted with the flat of the hand to carry their weight evenly. They walk to the drying wall and lay them one by one, starting high where sun will reach and stepping down as shade advances. The alley sighs. A seller passes with quiet sandals and a low call. The courtyard receives the sound and tucks it away. No one hurries. The vat holds its cloud. The channel talks to itself. 2 sparrows discuss a crumb near the door, and then forget what they were saying. The workers return to the bench. Mold. Decal, dip, level, couch again. And again until the rhythm begins to feel like a kind of breathing that belongs to the place. Midday arrives without changing the mill's voice. The channel keeps its even sentence. Shadows along the walls turn from narrow to thoughtful. At the press, the crossbar makes another slow journey, half a circle, then half again until the marked notch on the screw aligns with a charcoal line drawn long ago. The platen rests as a palm would, flat and sure, asking the stack to give what moisture it can. Water threads its way out and follows the carved gutter to a jar. The jar remembers to be useful twice. It cools the press's thought now and will visit herbs later. When the pressure sits, they leave it. Wood likes time to speak to fiber. The workers return to the vat, stir with the wide tooth raked from corner to corner, then bring the mold and decal together as if greeting friends. The dip is slower now, hands have found an easy confidence. A small figure 8 clears tiny ridges. The decal lifts. The new sheet gleams briefly like milk finding a bowl. Couching kneads felt with that quiet kiss the ear learns to trust. Felt, sheet, felt layer upon layer, the little tar grows again. On a side bench, a second rhythm begins. The sizing pot, a shallow copper pan, warms near a coal bed that mines itself. Inside, a thin barley starch broth sits clear as broth can be, neither too thick to pull a brush nor too thin to forget its job. One worker takes a sheet already dry from yesterday, lays it gently on a board, and carries a brush across it from edge to edge. The brush is soft. Its hair remembers to hold enough but not spill. The liquid disappears into the paper as a whisper would disappear into quiet company. A side note belongs kindly here. Not all papers ask for sizing, and not all sizes are alike. Starch offers a modest guidance. Letters stay where the pen invites them, and lines do not run toward margins when no one asks them to. At the drying wall, warm plaster accepts first a roll high and then another below. Fingers press corners flat, then lift away. Heat from the bricks is not sharp. It is the steady kindness a loaf receives when it sits near, not in the oven's mouth. When a sheet is ready to leave, the knife finds a corner and teases it up. The page peels with a sound like quiet cloth and holds its shape without complaint. Held to the light, it shows the memory of the mold's fine screen, a soft texture that will later take pen lines without salting. Burnishing, too, has its patient place. The wrap stone, set earlier on a stool, lies in a cloth that kept a little warmth. A sheet rests, and the stone travels in circles and long ovals, each pass firm and even. The worker's wrist does not drive, the arm guides, the shoulder breathes. With every turn, fibers lie flatter. The surface learns to shine just a degree, and the page grows friendly to ink's small shadows. If the order asks for brushwork rather than reed pens, they ease the pressure and answer shine with restraint. Paper can be garrulous or modest, the hand decides. At the gate, a visitor coughs likely the way one asks a mill to notice. A scribe stands there with a leather roll under his arm. He unwraps it and shows a sample, a page filled with measured lines and quiet script dots where breath sits in language, a wash of diluted color used to test a flower in a margin. He lays his palm flat on the sheet the workers offer. He slides it once to feel the tooth, then draws a short line with a reed pen he carries in narrow case. The ink settles, it does not pull. He smiles with one eye. More of this office, he says in a voice that will carry across a desk, not a market. He orders a set tied into quires, gatherings of a few sheets folded and nested, ready to be stitched. He prefers a decal that shows a little cloud along the edges. The worker notes the wish with a thread tying a small tuft to a peg labeled with the scribe's mark. Another customer comes with a basket and a patience that belongs to shops, a merchant who wraps spices in paper. His needs are different, sturdy, modest finish, sheets that do not complain if folded twice around cumin. The workers walk along the drying wall and choose a run with a little less burnish, a little more fiber, under the fingertips. Those will wrap goods without slipping their knots. Orders sort themselves by touch rather than ink. The mill keeps a short memory in the body. Back at the press, the crossbar turns backward a quarter and rises. Felts come apart like blankets folded between friends. Sheets are lifted one by one using the flat of the hand, never a pinch, so edges stay at peace. They travel to the wall and take their places, a careful masonry of pale rectangles. The empty felts are stacked, rolled lightly so they will lie well when asked again. Their wool has learned the smell of paper and water. It offers it back in comfort to the room. Near the vat, a small discipline repeats, skimming. Bits that escaped pounding tiny bark specks show as darker freckles. A ladle glides, and a fingertip collects them. The vet keeps itself honest so the days run looks of one family. If a sheet rises with a bubble, it goes aside without complaint. Later it will serve for practice strokes or for patterns cut to line a box. Nothing has to pretend to be more than its nature to be useful. A young helper arrives carrying narrow splints of willow. He sets them near the gate where bundles will be tied. He runs a thumb along one sheet and grins at the polish. He will likely carry these quires to the market, walking under plane trees, and find the scribe by the tea seller who sits with a cat in his lap. The helper has started to learn which weight pleases bookbinders and which face takes gold leaf kindly when a title asks for a shine. Knowledge grows at the edges first, then fills the middle. A gentle aside takes a seat here. Samarkand's papers traveled far by hand and animal, not because they shouted any novelty, but because they pleased tools, pen, brush, knife, and because they endured folding and stitching without taking offense. In a world of voices, paper exists to listen. The afternoon light bends low enough to warm the far wall. Sheets there give back a glow like cream in a shallow bowl. The sizing pot is covered for the day. A last set of dips finishes the pulp left in the vat. It is not polite to starve the mixture or drown it at the end. The rake slides through once more. The cloud looks even, 2 more sheets, perhaps 3, then they let the water run clear while the fibers settle back into their rest at the bottom. The vat will be washed with a rag that knows this work, and the screen will lie on its edge to remember its tightness. Packing begins as a slow ceremony. Dry sheets are counted into 5s, then into 10s. A thin strip of reed marks each group. Quires fold with a lap across the knee, the crease persuaded by a bone folder that knows how to be firm without cutting. The scribe's order is wrapped in paper that did not meet its own best self and tied with the willow splint. A small markaboo dot in the corner from a softened indigo stub tells whose bundle this is without asking letters to work in the yard. The merchant's wrapper sheets form a different stack, each turned so the decal edge alternates. Tied, they hold square. The helper places both bundles near the gate and sets a length of cloth over them against dust. Payment notes are not written yet. They rest in memory and in the straightness of the stacks. As the day leans toward evening, the mill does not close abruptly. The mold is rinsed in the channel. The decal stands to drip. Felts are hung where air moves. The press's screw receives a thumb of oil. Someone runs a cloth along the rails. The burning stone is wrapped, the burnisher asleep. The last sheets lifted from the wall remain warm against the palms. They cool in a pile small enough not to bend. The channel continues its sentence. The courtyard grows a little more forgiving. Work here ends the way it began, with water remembering to pass, with hands that prefer evenness over speed, with fibers that lie down together and decide to be a page. Late afternoon loosens its hold on heat, and the gate shadow stretches across the yard. Bundles wait under a cloth, tied with willow splints that make a sound like reeds when moved. The helper returns with a hand cart that has learned all the stones in the lane. Its wheels speak in soft clicks. He checks the cords on the handle, tightens one with his teeth, and sets the cart near the bundles, as if asking it not to wander. Packing is light but sure. Quires gatherings of 4 or 5 folded sheets nested together stack in 2s and 4s, so folds lie in opposite directions, and the pile behaves. For the scribe's order, the worker slides a thin reed between gatherings to keep air from hiding. He wraps the stack in a sheet that did not meet its best face today. Even ordinary paper can guard better paper without sulking. The willow splint goes around twice, then once across. A twist, a tuck, and a small knot that can be opened with a thumbnail. No wax seals nothing that would make a reader struggle at his desk. The merchant's wrappers form a lower bundle, more square. The helper lifts it first, elbow tucked close, and sets it to the cart with a breath that says the weight is respectable, not mean. The choir bundle follows and sits on top, offset so edges will not bruise. A length of cloth goes over both, corners folded under, a habit borrowed from bread sellers. The cart leans slightly toward the gate, ready to remember the lane's slope. Before they go, a binder arrives quiet shoes, a narrow awl in a wooden sheath tied to his belt with red thread. He greets the mill with the gentle cheerfulness of someone who likes paper enough to pat it. From his satchel he draws a folded cover of pasteboard and a spine lining. He does not place an order yet, he tests. He asks for a single quire of today's run and lays it on the low bench. His hands are tidy, his nails short. He presses the fold with a bone tool so the crease lies honest. He opens the gathering in the middle and pierces to small holes with the awl along the fold, one above, one below. A length of linen thread passes through, then back, in a simple stitch that has walked across many centuries without needing a new name. He tugs once, lightly, testing the paper's patience with thread. There is no tearing. He smiles with both eyes this time. He runs a brush charged with thin paste along a narrow scrap and lays it across the spine. The paste sits where it is placed, not bleeding into the leaf. Good sizing, he says in a quiet voice to the air. He closes the quire and rubs the folded edge with the bone tool again. The edge takes polish, growing firm without cracking. He nods, then sets the test aside under a small stone to wait for a short drying. He will carry it home and wake it again under a heavier board, then sew more gatherings to make a small book that will open without complaint when invited. A side note takes a seat at the bench. Many binders in towns like this chose thread of flax or silk, paste of wheat or rice, and simple stitches whose only job was to be kind to pages. Leather and boards may come later, gold sometimes, patterns too, but beneath the dress. A book breathes best when paper and sewing trust each other. The cart goes first to the scribe. The lane follows a narrow, sheeted course past a potter's door, a spice shop that smells intelligent, and a low wall where grapes learn to rest. The helper keeps to the side where stones lie more honest. At the tea seller's corner, the cat has moved from lap to shelf, agreeing to supervise. The scribe stands under an awning and reaches for the bundle before hello fully forms. Paper has that effect on hands who write for a living. He unties the willow, touches the top leaf, holds it up to the light. The mole's faint grid smiles back at him. He draws a line with a reed and watches the ink settle. No feathering. He blows once, gently. He slides a sheet over the page and draws another line to see if they will lie companionably. They do. He pays partly now with a small bar of tin clipped from a larger ingot, and partly with a written promise which he writes, for neatness, on paper from the last order. The helper tucks the promise into the mill's pouch, and accepts a handful of apricots for the walk back. At the market edge the cart finds the merchant. Wrappers are counted by tens and tied into smaller squares. The merchant drums two fingers across one bundle, pleased with the tooth. He will fold them over saffron and cinnamon so the scent sleeps until opened. He pays with coins that carry the past in their dents. The helper covers the cart again, lighter now, and turns toward the mill as the first lamps lean into evening. Back in the courtyard, the day softens into chores that ask little thought. The mold lies on its edge to keep its screen from learning a sag. The decal hangs from a peg. Felts, rinsed along the channel, drip on a line and make a rhythm without trying. The press screw receives a last turn backwards, so wood will spend the night rustful. The sizing pot cools with its cloth cover settled well. One worker checks the plank where sheets dry to be sure no corner has learned to curl. An open palm flattens one, then another. A knife lifts one leaf and sets it lower where warmth is kinder. Orders are noted without ink. A knot in a red stringer on a peg marks scribe done next by 9th day. A second peg tied with a pale thread says Merchant Weekly, as before. A splinter stuck through both threads reminds the mind that these two, by chance, can ride in the same cart next time. The mill's memory is small objects in simple arrangements, respectful of the fact that paper should carry writing, not the shop itself. As dusk fills the corners, burnished sheets cooled in a short stack are stood on their edges so air passes between them. They resemble loaves that have learned stillness. The helper touches to fingers, to the topmost leaf as if testing a crust. It gives, then holds. The workers cover the stacks with cloth to keep breath and dust at a polite distance through the night. A quiet aside finds its place. Caravans will carry such stacks far rolled for a map, folded for a letter, cut for a ledger, pasted for a label on a jar. Paper is the patient traveler. It wants only dryness, balance, and a hand that does not rush. The gate is pulled to but not shut tight. Night air likes to move. The channel continues in the dark, telling a story it never finishes. In a corner a small lamp sits low. Its flame has the size of a pearl. It does not compete with the moon, which throws a pale sheet across the courtyard floor. On that borrowed page the mold's frame casts a clean rectangle. The decal's shadow sits around it like a quiet border. The press stands like a thoughtful tree, its screw a straight line pointing nowhere in particular. Someone checks the bundles by touch, not counting, just feeling the right shape. Someone else brushes stray pulp from the vats rim with the back of a hand. The mulberry over the wall moves once, and is still. Far away a bell talks to the hour. Here it is only a soft sign that the day is folded. The last act belongs to habit, a hand laid briefly on the vat, another on the press, a nod to the wall of resting sheets. The courtyard keeps them all company. Paper does not need watching, only time. The night will give it. Morning returns as a pale wash over plaster and mulberry leaf. The channel keeps its steady sentence, neither louder nor less sure. At the gate a bundle waits linen rags from a tailor's shop, clipped seams, and clean offcuts wrapped in a length of cloth tied with reed. Beside it sits a woven tray of mulberried bark strips from groves upriver, the inner layer pale as milk tea, the outer kept aside for fuel. The workers lift both with the same courtesy. Paper can come from cloth or tree. The mill is content to listen to either story. Rags meet a different water first. A tub stands under the lean-to, half filled last night and left to think. One worker opens the bundle and sorts by feel, smooth linen to one side, coarser hemp to another, colored scraps that might argue with a clean sheet into a third pile for wrappers. Buttons and threads are picked out with a small hook and laid in a bowl that keeps all such prizes, the shop's quiet archaeology. Rags are cut into hand-wide strips with shears whose hinge knows the sound. They soak in a mild lye stirred with a stick that carries notches at finger spaces. A side note belongs here. Cloth wants longer to forget what it was. Bark, persuaded yesterday, already stands ready to be patient. At the pounding block the mallet falls and rises without hurry. Today the vat will drink a blend. Bark for strength and a modest tooth. Rag for a cloth-like calm. The first worker folds softened bark into the block. The second adds a ladle of rag slurry when the rhythm asks. The rake with wide teeth stitches the two together in the vat front to back, side to side until the cloud looks of one mind. A small dip proves the blend, then another. The sheet on the mold feels supple in the wrists, neither brittle nor woolly. The decal lifts, Couching lays a first leaf on felt. A tower begins in that old, friendly pattern felt. Paper, felt, paper, each layer patient with the next. Before the press has its turn, a visitor steps through the gate with a careful gait and a narrow box held flat in both hands. An illuminator, by the look of the padded board under his arm, and the brush case tied with silk cord. He bows to the vat, to the workers, to the wall of pale rectangles drying into themselves. From the box he draws a leather cushion dusted with chalk, a gilder's tip brush hairs marching in a thin line, and a book of gold leaf that weighs nearly nothing and shines like a whisper when opened. He asked for a single finish, sheet-sized Monastic, burnished just enough, and lays it on the board. A small patch of bull-red clay ground fine and kissed with a drop of glue goes onto the margin with a squirrel hair brush in a rounded square no larger than a coin. He waits while it cools to dullness, then leans close and breathes once through his mouth, so a little damp returns. His tip lifts a leaf, not by force but by coaxing. The gold rises as if it wanted to float. He lays it down on the bowl and presses with breath and brush until the leaf agrees. A dog's tooth burnisher agate in a wooden handle travels the edge in a slow crescent. Gold wakes without noise. It looks like still water caught in a frame. He tests ink nearby with a reed pen and a small knot of soot and gum. The line holds by the gold without feathering. The sized paper refuses to drink too much. He smiles, then tries a wash-thin lapis in a puddle from a shell brushed around the gilded square. The color sits without sulking, drying to a soft halo. This face will take borders, he says gently, and a small star. He orders a few quires with this finish, asking that the sizing stay modest and the burnish even like the inside of a shell, not like a mirror. The worker ties a light blue thread with a single knot on the peg that keeps the illuminator's wishes. The knot ties the request to a day later in the week. The mill's ledger needs little ink. On a beam near the gate hangs a narrow board strung with cords. Each cord bears a color for a customer and a little vocabulary of knots. Overhand for gather, flat for deliver, a slip for when the cart shares another route. Today the scribe's cord dyed with a thumb of indigo moves one knot along to 8th day. The merchant's pale cord gains a second flat knot for his double bundle when the caravan returns. The illuminator's new light blue appears with one overhand knot set 3 finger widths from the beam 3rd morning. A thin reed stuck under 2 cords says those 2 will ride together if the weather speaks kindly. It is a calendar a hand can read without waking a pen. Meanwhile, near the press, the crossbar begins its deeper arc. The screw sings in its low-wood voice, then rests. Water climbs the carved gutter. A jar catches it for herbs. The felt paper tower lies down and grows thinner under patient weight. When the mark on the screw meets its line, turning stops. The workers leave it to think while they stir the vat and dip a slow dozen more sheets. Mold, deco, dip, level, couch each leaf deciding almost by itself to become a page. On the drying wall, yesterday's blend leaves with a clean peel. The knife lifts a corner, two hands spread apart. The sheet come free with a sigh like a well-turned pillow. A run of papers that will wrap spices receives less burnish. Another run that will carry verses receives more. The burnisher travels in longer ovals today, agate stone whispering across fibers that choose to lie down together. When a sheet shows a tiny bubble where air was content to hide, it goes to a stack for practice, for ledger labels, for the bottom of a box, and honest use for a leaf that did not fancy a line of poetry. At noon the binder returns to collect his little test. He taps the spine, the paste has married thread without sulking. He bends the gathering, it opens like a well-behaved fan. The fold remembers, he says, and adds a larger order. Quires for an account book that will be handled daily, edges not too sharp, sizing enough to refuse greasy fingers. The worker ties a plain linen thread on the binder's peg and sets to knots, one for count, one for sturdiness. The pegboard begins to look like a thin orchard of promises. A brief aside finds its place. The mill's week is a map not of streets but of touch. Threads say who, not say how many, spaces say when. When memory grows heavy, these little signals carry it easily, leaving paper free to wait for the marks it will host. Afternoon leans, the blended pulp thins to a pleasant clarity, the sign to finish without starving or flooding the vat. Two last sheets, then water alone. The mold is rinsed, the decal drips, felts hang where the breeze is honest. The sizing pot, used earlier for a polite coat on the illuminator's stack, is cooled, its skin lifted, and set aside for glue. The press opens, felts peel, sheets walk to the wall, warm in the hands. A few are burnished just shy of gloss, by request. A few are left with more tooth, because the merchant's saffron likes to grip. As shadows lengthen, the pegboard ledger settles into its evening posture, cords not tugging, knots all saying their small truths. The helper checks the cart's axle and lays to splints for tomorrow, when the scribe's lane end. The illuminator's quarter will both be visited. He sets a cloth over the ready bundles. The mulberry over the wall stirs once, leaves approve. Before closing, one more courtesy. The illuminator returns to lift his trial square and turn it in the low sun. The gold answers politely, not too loud. He breathes on it once more and runs the burnisher's tip across a corner. It sings a tiny, glassy note. He nods, replaces the leaf book in its cover, and ties the silk cord without haste. "Third morning," he says, glancing at the pegboard as if it had a face. The blue knot waits exactly where his eye expects it. The gate draws near to shut but does not hurry. Water keeps its sentence. Paper rests in layers as if sleeping, stacks that look like bread cooling on a long shelf. The mill breathes as a room does when work has been done kindly. Orders are not heavy. They hang as threads. Morning sets a gentle brightness on the plaster and finds the pegboard already telling the day. Cords hang without hurry. Knots rest at the places agreed. The helper oils the cart's axle with a thumb dipped in lamp grease and turns the wheel once to hear a satisfied murmur. On the bench, two bundles wait like tidy loaves under cloth. The scribe's quires lightly burnished, modestly sized, and the illuminator's sheets with a softer face, kept a little shy of gloss by design. The merchant's square of wrappers, tied yesterday, sits lower, its deckled edges alternating like teeth arranged for Kong. Before lifting anything, they visit the pegboard. The worker touches the indigo cord for the scribe, loosens one flat knot, moves it to the beam's end, and slides the cord aside. Now, the pale cord for the merchant keeps one knot for a turn. The no-light blue cord for the illuminator shifts one finger toward tomorrow came. A thin reed that held the scribe and illuminator together is removed and laid along the pegboard's top. It has done its guiding and can rest. A side note belongs softly here. Finishing is often this entire move. Remove small subtractions that leave the day lighter. Bundles are lifted with elbows tucked close so edges will not learn to bend. The helper sets the merchant's wrappers at the cart's base, then the scribe's quires, then the illuminator's lighter stack on top, wrapped in a cloth whose knot opens with a pull. Willow splints click softly against each other when tightened. A strip of paper with a blue dot rests under the top cord. That dot has followed the illuminator's requests since yesterday and will travel to his table as a familiar face. The lane has its memory. The cart hums over stones it knows. At the tea seller's corner, the cat has decided the highest shelf is now a throne. It looks benevolent. The helper turns toward the scribe first. Under the awning, the scribe's desk holds a sharpened reed, a dish of soot and gummy, and a weight shaped like a fish to keep breezes honest. He aunties the bundle as if it were a letter from a friend. A sheet lifts. He holds it toward the light. The mole's faint grid smiles back. He draws two short lines and watches them dry with an exhale. Good, he says, not loud. A quire opens like a quiet book. He tests a fold with a bone folder. The crease lies true. Payment is measured in clipped coin and a written promise, both familiar. He adds a small request for later, a handful of narrower leaves, the width of my palm for notes that will travel roll. The helper nods and ties a short linen thread with one knot on the scribe's peg in his mind. The mill's pegboard will learn it before noon. Next, the illuminator 2 turns of the cart's wheel and a lane that smells of mended sandals and walnuts. He receives the top bundle with both hands, as if he might rise from it. He opens a corner and touches one leaf with the back of a finger, testing surface without oil. A breath visits the page, a tip lifts a square of gold, a trial patch shines, obedient but not eager. He smiles with his mouth and eyes together. This face listens, he says. He pays with small polished stones that the mill sometimes uses to burnish, and a pinch of saffron tucked in paper gifts rather than coin, a neighbor's way. He ties the cloth and promises to send a tray of treats when his borders bloom. The helper accepts the promise as if it were already sweet. On the way back, the cart speaks less. Absence weighs less than presence. The merchant's shop receives wrappers without ceremony, as properly as bread receives a cloth. He drums his fingers once along the stack and scatters to dried limes and a story about a caravan that sang quietly to itself at night. Payment arrives in straightforward coins. The cart turns home lighter, wheels finding the small smoothnesses between stones as if the road agreed. At the mill the courtyard is ready to fold the week. The pegboard's cords shift once more. The light blue knot moves to the beam's end and is slipped off entirely. The illuminator delivered. The indigo cord that marked the scribe returns to center for next. One small overhand knot ties at a finger's space to say narrow leaves. The pale merchant cord stays hanging but bare for today's time. The worker rests a splinter under it, and the scribes a sign that they may share the cart again. A calendar done in threads and spaces has said everything without pinning a single word to paper. Now the vat receives its courtesy, a washing that feels like thanks. The remaining cloud is let thin to clear, and the rake sweeps the bottom so pulp won't settle into corners. A cloth that knows this work wipes the rim, and a handful of clean water from the channel rinses what hands have left. The mold's screen is examined against the light, no warp, no sag. A fingertip finds a stray fiber and coaxes it away. The decal stands on a peg to keep its frame from learning a curve. Felts are carried to the line and shaken once water falls in quiet beads. Sizing pot and burnisher rest. The agate tool is wrapped in its cloth. The bone folder lies with its face up so nobody will step on it in haste. The press's screw receives a backward turn, then another, so wood will sleep easy. The bench is wiped with the broad of the hand, not a rag the better to feel any stray grit that might trouble a sheet tomorrow. The wall of drying paper gives up its last leaves of the day, each lifted with two hands, each peeled by a corner, and gathered to a small stack that stands on its edge like a calm thought. For a moment they do nothing. The courtyard wears afternoon like a light shawl. The mulberry leaf against the wall has found its own shade. Water goes on in the channel, pleased with its sentence. The helper stands by the gate and counts bundles by shape. Not number one returned cloth from the scribe folded, one empty splint, one covered stack ready for tomorrow's market, all as they should be. Visitors who speak softly arrive late, a binder with a thank you, a slip of blue ribbon for the pegboard, a woman with a spool of flax thread to trade for wrapper sheets next week, a boy who brings news about a cartwheel that needs a spoke. Each leaves something small and receives something small. Mills breathe best when trades are like that. As the sun slides, the mill grows its night habits. The gate becomes a little crooked on purpose to leave a hand's breadth for air. The last sheets stand on edge under cloth. The pegboard shows an easy face, few knots pulled forward, most waiting at the middle. A reed laid across two cords says tomorrow's together. The mold's fine screen cools a thin shadow on the wall. The decal outlines it like a dream's frame. The press, taller than a man, seems to nod once, and then forget us. A gentle aside sets itself by the door. Paper is a good sleeper. It wakes if called by pen, by knife, by brush. Otherwise it prefers to rest stacked, edges aligned, in the company of felt and wood. It keeps its promise by doing nothing loudly. The workers wash their hands at the channel. Water leaves wet cuffs that will dry by the time the tea cools. The helper checks the cart strap once more and hangs it where leather will remember its shape. Someone moves the small bowl that caught the press water to the herb bed. Someone else lifts a dropped willow splint and sets it across a peg so it will not learn to bend. The courtyard goes hush. A lamp the size of a plum wakes near the door. It shines into the mold's shadow and then decides not to reach further. The mill's breathing slows to match the channel's slower talk. The weak, having been gathered, releases its knots in the mind instead of on the board. All is ready for next making. Bark and rag in their corners. That with its patient wood felts clean, press all, threads on the pegboard waiting to say little things. The paper rests like cooled bread, stacks with soft corners, a quiet promise waiting for hands that write, draw, wrap, account, stitch. And as the courtyard dims and the mold's frame turns to shadow, Let us step out into evening lanes where glass globes wait along the street, and the lamplighters slow. Careful rounds turn darkness into a chain of warm pearls. Dusk draws its slow line across the roofs, and the street begins to soften. Shopkeepers lean brooms against door frames. A cat chooses a warm step and arranges its paws in the way cats have always known, from a narrow shed near the yard of the gasworks. A lamplighter steps into the evening with the unhurried air of someone who keeps a familiar promise. His coat is long and plain, brushed clean of soot at noon. A scarf sits flat against his neck. It is therefore damp rather than for show. Over one shoulder he carries a light a slender staff ending in a small hook and a short, shielded flame in a little cup. At his belt hangs a ring of keys that do not jangle because each key has learned the habit of lying against the necks. A leather pouch rests at his hip. Inside are mantles wrapped in paper, a strip of oiled rag, a stub of chalk, and a pencil that writes dark on damp glass. Everything has a place that the hand can find without looking. He pauses at the yard gate and tastes the air the way sailors do, not for storms, only for a sense of how the night will sit. The evening smells of coal and cool iron near the works, but the scent thins as he walks. His route begins at the outer square, passes under for rows of plane trees, crosses a river by a modest bridge, and returns along a market street where fruit barrels drowse behind shutters. Each lamp has a name on his chart, but he carries the map in his feet. A side note belongs softly here. The city's glow feels simple at night, yet it rests on many quiet agreements, pipes laid with a steady fall, valves that remember their position, watchmen who prefer light to guesswork, and one person at a time who makes a small flame choose its place. The first lamp waits at the corner by the baker's lane. It is a sober post with a glass globe that clouded a little during the day. He places the end of the pole in a slot on the lamp's small door and lifts. The door swings up. He draws the shielded flame close, turns a tiny stopcock with the smallest key, and listens for a sound that is never loud, the breath of gas arriving. The flame meets that breath. A pearl appears. He lowers the door. A soft circle of light finds the pavement and puts a gentle edge on shadows. The lamp does not blaze. It announces itself as a companion. He steps back 2 paces to read the globe. Soot has blurred one pane where a cart splashed water this morning. From his pouch he draws the old rag, folded into a square. He reaches up, wipes in a slow circle, then crosses once with the rag turned clean. The glass answers, not bright, just less tired. He marks the post with a dot of chalk near the base, today's quiet sign that this one was wiped, so the same care will not be spent twice when the round comes back. A boy drifts near, rolling a hoop with a stick, half curious. The lamplighter smiles without taking his hands from his work. He knows that questions live in children's ribs at this hour, but he prefers not to invite chatter in streets where horses make their own minds. The boy watches the hooked door close and the small light steady itself, then rolls on. People become taller in lamplight. The boy enjoys the trick. At the second post the key fails to turn. He does not hurry it. He leans the pole against his shoulder, warms the key a little in his palm, and tries again with patience rather than force. Metal agrees when asked kindly. The valve shifts a hair. Gas arrives with its dry whisper. Flame meets it and settles to the size he expects for this street. A side note, placed here like a marker pebble, Pressure is not the same in every quarter. Far lines need a larger trust. Near lines ask a lighter hand. Lamplighters learn the city's invisible pulse by air and by the shape of a flame. Between posts he counts his steps without numbers, corner to corner, tree to tree, window to window, placing the root back into his bones so the work carries him even if fog comes. He listens for small stories, a shutter that complains a little more than yesterday, a loose iron shoe on a horse, a cartman humming in a key that says he ate well. His attention is wide and gentle. It gathers evidence and lets it rest. At the third lamp he changes a mantle. He feels the limber weight of the little mesh in its paper wrap, opens the door, pinches the old mantle free with a twist, and lays the new one in its place with two steady fingers. The net is fine as spiders work and would break fast in anger. He smooths it with a breath only, then opens the valve. The mantle glows at once, shy then certain, becoming a small white cloud that remembers dignity. He closes the door and checks the seam. A chalk tick meets the post-new mantle, so tomorrow's hand will pass without reconsidering. A woman sets a pail outside her step and nods in the lamp's direction. "Thank you," she says, as if the light belonged to both of them, and he had only reminded it of its duty. He touches the brim of his cap. Words stay small at this hour. The lamplighter keeps the city's night from being sharp. People like to meet their doorstep in a known light. The fourth post sits on the bridge. Here he lifts the door and tastes the air again. A mist rises from the river and pretends to be a thin cloud at knee height. He keeps his scarf closer, tilts the flame by habit to shade it from the damp, and waits a heartbeat longer before opening the valve. The flame forms and holds a little bluer at first, then white. Reflections from the globe fall into the black water as coins might fall into a well. On the far bank someone shakes a rug and laughs once at something that isn't funny. Night makes ordinary sounds sound like secrets even when they are not. He notes a pain that needs attention tomorrow. The putty has shrunk to a line that will one day admit rain. He writes a small mark on his paper with the pencil, a code only he and the foreman would bother to know, a half square for glass, a dot for putty, a short line for wickless repair. Though gas has moved past true weeks now, the paper goes back, the habit remains. Some tools are carried because the hand would miss them if they stayed in a drawer. The round continues. Lift, listen, light, wipe if needed, chalk if done. By the time he reaches the market street, the lamps behind him form a gentle procession. Shop signs look friendly even though their owners have gone home. Barrels keep their shape in the tender glow. A dog reads news from a post and decides it is satisfactory. Two older men stand under a lamp and fold a newspaper together as if it were a map. They will not read by it long. They will carry the light in their minds to a table where a single candle waits. He reaches the square just as the clock in the tower prepares to say the hour. He times his work so the sound finds him near the center. The chime speaks once for the quarter, then again, measured and deep, for the whole hour. He holds still and lets the notes pass through him, as carpenters do when a beam is set, standing calm so the moment can land. Then he lifts his pole again. The city begins to look finished for the night, edges softened, corners persuaded, the long seam of the river stitched with little pearls across its bridges. The lamplighter's coat knows the path to the next lamp without instruction. His feet go, his hands find key and door. The small flame at the pole's tip offers its patient help again and again. Fog arrives without an argument. It comes first as a softness around ankles, then rises until it remembers to breathe at the height of knees and carts. The lamplighter notices it where the river's damp meets the market street. Smells fold together coal from distant chimneys, apple crates that kept a little summer, iron rails that have known rain. He draws his scarf up a thumb width and slows his step by half. Fog is friendly when not hurried past. At the next post he wipes glass before he opens the door. The rag, oiled earlier, travels in slow circles. Glass learned dust all afternoon. It will meet fog more politely if cleaned now. Under the cloth his fingers read the pane, small stories the tiny ripple made when an old glazier drew molten glass across a table. A minuscule pucker where putty hit a chip, a hairline scratch that tells of a broom that once leaned too eager. He lifts the door, turns the key, listens. Gas arrives as a whisper. The flame meets it and steadies to a purr with a faint bouillard. He lowers the door and waits a breath to see how fog and glass will agree. The globe blows like milk, soft but faithful. He marks the base with a short chuck stroke, not on the street side but on the inward face where carts will not rub it away. Fog often asks to coats of care. The chuck says this lamp has already met its kindness. He steps back, gauging the next post by the dim contour of a plane tree and the memory of his feet. He counts in spaces rather than numbers. For storm drains, a doorway that stands shy, a window where a plant leans out, then the lamp. His pole still knows where to go. At the grocer's corner he changes nothing. The mantle there remembers last week's attention and offers a steady white without coaxing. He wipes the inside of the glass, this time a little trick with a dry cloth wrapped round the hook, and passed gently within the open door because fog prefers to borrow the inside as well as the out. The city under fog grows closer, sounds move nearer, footsteps learn for. He hears a low will at the far end of the street and knows it is the baker by the rhythm of emptied boards shifting on a cart. A constable appears from fog as furniture appears in dim rooms slowly, without surprise. He nods from under his cape. The lamplighter nods back and lifts his pole. A few words pass, just enough for the constable to say that the fog has behaved this weekend, for the lamplighter to say that the bridge pings will ask for new putty when warmer days agree. Both remarks are notes placed in air. They will land later. The constable continues with the measured patience of someone who prefers to find nothing. A gentle aside belongs here. Lamplighters no leaks by nose, and by the pitch a valve sings when turned. If either speaks wrong, the door stays shut, the key is pocketed. And the mark on paper becomes a visit, in daylight with tools that earn their living in hands slower than evenings. Tonight every post behaves, the city keeps its promise. Past the shoemaker's lane fog thickens. The lamplighter shortens his stride to keep balance, ready for a curb that might have learned a trick in the dark. He lets his pole touch paving now and then with the lightest sound, as a blind companion might. Glass wipes slower here because breath can cloud what fingers just cleared. He does not scold the air, he works with it. Two lamps show their circles as overlapping coins on the wet stones. Between them the world folds to gray, within them faces return. He reaches a lamp whose pane trembled in a breeze last week. The putty ring looks honest now, firm to the eye and even in touch. He opens the door, turns the key a hair, and notices the flame would grow too large for this corner of Lefthoot's appetite. He trims with turn and breath, a little less gas, a whisper more air by leaving the door ajar for the span of 2 breaths, then shut. The flame settles to a disk the size his hand trusts a white center, a calm halo. Fob wears it well. A boy from the hoop returns, hoop gone, carrying a loaf wrapped in cloth that smells of anise. Will the lamps stay all night? He asks, because Fob makes rules seem newer. Until they are invite sleep, the lamplighter says, and the boy nods as if this were a law he could live with. He moves on bread warm against his ribs, lamplight making his breath a brief, private ghost. Along the market's length the posts reply to his pull as if they had learned his name. He cleans less on those he rubbed last week, glass holds memory. The chalk's small language multiplies at bases, dotted marks for wipe, short ticks for mantle, a letter for a screw that wanted oil. The street becomes legible to anyone who speaks this quiet code, though few do. Even so, the marks will wash or wear away before long. They only need to remain until tomorrow's thoughts. Fog thins surprisingly at the square where trees stand older. Leaves hold damp at a different height and give it back as graciousness. Here the lamps make a necklace, globes like pearls strung along the path where roots have lifted the flagstones into softened waves. Walkers arrange themselves into the light the way readers move a page under a candle until the words sit right. A couple pauses under a lamp and becomes a silhouette with hands deciding how to be. A dog chooses the boundary between 2 circles because it is where smells multiply. The clock speaks the quarter. The lamplighter likes to adjust his pace so that he reaches the far side of the square when the hour declares itself. He listens as he works, letting the bell mark time in his body rather than in his books. Tonight the bell has the round tone of metal that has never been lonely. He holds his breath for the first stroke, then opens the small door on the next lamp, turns the key with the sound of the second stroke, and breathes out by the third. It is not ceremony, it is harmony, and it helps the hands not rush. At a narrow alley, he pauses to wipe a pane that children smudged with cold fingers in the afternoon. He leaves the smudge nearly gone, not entirely. Someone will recognize their hand tomorrow and feel included in the city's light. On another post he notices spider silk drawn from arm to arm of the bracket, a little bridge of its own. He does not sweep it, it catches nothing harmful, and gives the lamp a thin crown for those who look too closely. He checks one more valve for polite obedience, then sets his chalk to the base with a small extra dot, the sign that Fob was met and managed here, which will explain to his foreman why the rag is more seasoned than usual. His pencil writes a half square on his paper under the lamps, number the pane he thought of at the bridge so the morning will remember to send putty. By the time he reaches the far end, Market Street has put on a necklace as promised, the lamps speaking gently to one another under trees that have decided not to drop. Windows behind shutters glow in different languages of warmth. A taller light for someone reading, a lower for stew. A wandering light for someone looking for a misplaced pair of spectacles that sits on their head. Horses breathe slow steam. A cart tip clicks. Somewhere a fiddle tests a phrase then rests, deciding to save music for rooms. The lamplighter looks back only once, not to check his work, but to see the whole line as a finished sentence. It reads cleanly. He sets off toward the river again. Fog thins over the water, then returns in corners. He finds the bridge's midpoint and lifts a pane carefully to wipe a narrow crescent that gathered dew within. The flame reflects twice in the glass, one for the lamp, one for the water. He closes the door and takes his own breath as a measure. The city holds. He turns into a lane that will lead him to the next dozen posts. His pole rides his shoulder lightly. His keys are quiet as always. His steps write small, even marks on the damp stone, which forget them at once. The work proceeds, a method of asking each lamp to be itself, neither more nor less. Night has settled into itself. The quarter-hour bell lifts a quiet hand now and then, and the city answers by resting a little deeper. The lamplighter moves along a lane of workshops that sleep with their tools put away, hinges relieved of duty, benches swept of shavings. His pole rides his shoulder like a thin companion. His keys nest against one another. The shielded flame in its tiny cup keeps its own small vow. A stray wind tries the corner where two streets meet and makes a pocket of impatience. Fog, earlier so courteous, runs thin. The draft slips up into a lamp's globe and worries the mantle. The lamplighter feels the change before he sees it. The light thins to a chalky ghost, then flutters. He lifts the door at once, closes two fingers around the valve, and eases the flow down while the gust spends itself. The mantle steadies, then blushes back to white. He waits the length of a breath and one more. Only then does he close the door and set a small chalk cross at the base, the sign for gust-tested. Watch, a side note belongs quietly here. Once fired, mantles are dignified and brittle, more like moth-wing ash that glows than cloth that can forgive. They ask to be treated as elders capable, but pleased with courtesy. At the next post the mantle has taken offense. Perhaps a boy's thrown cap brushed the globe earlier. Perhaps the draft found a seam. The light has thinned to a dull egg. He opens the little door, turns the key shut, and lets the glow go to sleep. He pinches the mantle's metal tie, twists, and draws the frail net away in one piece. It collapses in his palm as a memory does when touched. From his pouch he brings a fresh mantle in its folded paper, lifts it by the tie and sets it in the clip with two careful fingers. A very small breath rounds it. He opens the valve a patient half-turn. The new net awakens with a shy blue, then learns white. For a moment he shields the door with his hand against the lingering draft. When the light reads right, he closes and latches. Chalk makes a short double tick at the base, new, and he adds a dot beside it, wind, so the morning knows why his pouch will be lighter by one. Midnight edges near, the tower clock clears its throat far off. He adjusts his pace to float between the strokes, as if stepping on quiet stones across a slow stream. In this hour the city's sounds turn to the small grammar of rest, a latch set gently, embers shifted once, the shutter lifted for a breath of air, and then persuaded to lie back down. On a step a pair of boots rests with their tongues out, drying. A cat trades one warm sill for another. Somewhere a violin warms a single note, and then forgives itself for not going on. Near the river the lamps stand a little taller, their globes beating with the smallest sweat. He wipes one inner crescent, as earlier, by wrapping a dry cloth around the hook and giving the glass a quiet kiss within. Reflections multiply on the water, each lamp a pale coin, and the bridge repeats itself vertically like a polite echo. He checks the putty, seeing he'd marked before. It holds its line. He lets the next lamp be. Not every post wants company every night. At a corner with a pump, He unhooks a small wooden box fixed to the bracket the round's pocket ledger, dry even when weather sulks. Inside waits a stub of pencil tied on string and a ruled page that has known many hands. He writes small, to please the foreman's eye, number 17 mantle renewed, gust keep, number 23 inner wipe, pane even, bridge east putty when warm. He adds a sign for fob met, and managed to neat dots beside the number of the market street. Section. His letters are the kind that prefer to be read once and put away. The book returns to its latch. A side note, only a whisper. Not every town keeps such a box. Some ask the round man to carry his memory home. Here they share a page so that the morning's crew can step out already knowing which pocket of the map asked for kindness. He turns into a narrow passage that lives between houses like a ribbon. Clotheslines have learned to be high there, shutters were the polish that hand-washing gives. 2 lamps live in this sliver, less for travelers than for neighbors who like to see their latch at night. He opens one door, turns the key, and hears the valve sing the pitch he expects, for this branch neither eager nor sulky. He waits an extra half-breath because the lane hoards air, then the pearl forms and keeps its roundness. On the opposite wall, laundry lines remember faces as shadows quiet masks, smiling accidentally. A constable passes again, this time slower, cloak holding a little dew. He pauses under the lamp and takes a note in his little book, not words, just the mark that says light. He shows the lamplighter the page as if to say your part is seen, and the lamplighter tips the brim of his cap as if to answer so is yours to jobs that prefer to be noticed little notice one another kindly, and move on. Half the district behind him hums under ordered light. He reaches a yard behind the gasworks where a door always stands ajar at night. Inside, a small clock with an honest face ticks. An iron gauge with a slow needle measures pressure in a round that does not pretend to haste. A ledger lies open on a table, a pencil rests across it like a gate. He writes again, this time for the book that will talk to the morning foreman. Route complete as far as the market fob moderate, 1 mantle replaced, 1 pane to be watched, pressure steady at the mark between good and more than we need. He makes a small square around the bridge note. Squares mean send putty and patient hands. He warms his fingers. By a small stove holds them out, and then returns them to the work. On his way out he listens to the mains by air, a habit with no name. He places his palm lightly on the pipe where it rises, and lets the hum tell him that the breath within is even. Engineers will check with tools in daylight, at night a hand does. Past the works the air changes less iron, more bread because night bakers begin their quiet shift. He meets one at a corner, floor-like pale fog on his sleeves. They exchange half a greeting, the kind that opens and closes with the same word. The lamplighter wakes one more pane, not truly for the baker, but the baker will think so and smile to himself later. He crosses the river again. The bridge globes now look like stars that decided to step closer for warmth. Wind has forgotten its tricks. Fog is a polite thought rather than a thing. He checks a lamp at the far end that sometimes sulks after midnight. Tonight it behaves. He sets. No chalk. Sometimes the best mark is none. The last stretch leads through a square where plane trees keep their own counsel. Lamps there wear a finer dust, because afternoons gather talkers who tap pipes and tell the same stories differently each day. He lifts to doors, cleans within where smoke from those stories has lived, and closes by degrees so air will not quarrel with flame. A bench under one lamp holds a forgotten glove. He places it on the bench's arm where a morning hand will see it first. Then comes the long view. He turns once not to count, not to check, only to let his eye read the sentence. Curve of river, bridge stitched, lane softened, square composed, alleys persuaded. The city looks like a book closed gently with the finger holding a place. He feels the round settle into memory. Which posts ask oil, which eyes still need inner wiping tomorrow, where chalk marks will want answering. He does not yet think of dousing. That will come at the hour men agree belongs to quiet, for now his job is to keep the thread unbroken. He walks on, letting the lamps handle the rest, each a small, faithful breath. The deep hour arrives the way dew arrives quietly, from every side at once. The quarter bell keeps its modest duty. Between strokes the city lies still, as if someone placed a hand on its shoulder and it understood. The lamplighter's steps learn a softer heel, leather remembers to whisper. His pole rides easy on the notch of his shoulder. The keys rest like coins that prefer not to rattle. He turns into a narrow crescent of houses that bend around a tiny garden. The garden owns a single bench, a pump with a tin cup, and 2 rose canes that believe in next year. The lamp at the bend gives a steady pearl, but the next, half hidden by a plane tree, looks unsure of itself. He senses it from the way shadow pools on the paving. Up close he sees why. The globe's lower pane bears a star-shaped crack, fresh enough that dust has not settled in it. A coach may have brushed it with a load, or a ladder may have asked for more room than it had. The mantle inside sulks yellow at the edge, thin at the heart. He opens the door and shuts the valve with 2 fingers. When white fades to gray, he pinches the mantle's tie and lifts the fragile net away. It collapses in his palm, weightless and done with its work. From the pouch he draws a fresh mantle and lays it in the clip, breath rounding it once. He turns the key a fraction. The blue nimbus appears, then learns why. Now for the draft. The cracked pane admits a thin impatience that would scold this new light until dawn. He looks up at the branches. They do not mind sharing. From his coat he pulls a small square of mica kept for such nights, thinner than a fingernail and clear as frozen breath. He slides it against the inside of the cracked pane and tucks its edges beneath the retaining tabs. It becomes an invisible shield, asking the wind to walk around rather than through. He watches 2 breaths and 1 more. The flame holds. The globe gathers itself. He lowers the door. On the post's base he makes a pencil sign, a tiny open triangle, glass to be replaced, and a dot man. Till new, so the morning crew will bring a pane and a small patience. The rescue was not grand, was enough. Down the crescent a watchman stands with his cape folded back from his throat. His staff touches the stones like a metronome that forgot its task and simply enjoys keeping time. He blows a low note on a pipe the width of a reed. The lamplighter returns a nod that says, "All lamps along this curve are friendly. No report is made. The code on the base will tell the day the rest." The workbench lane follows, where joiners and smiths will stand in 12 hours and ask tools to remember. Their windows were a faint flower of sawdust on the inside. Glass keeps such memories longer than people do. He wipes one inner crescent by habit, the dry cloth around the hook, the smallest touch. The flame looks out with clear eyes. He lets the door down with care that does not call attention to itself. Bread speaks low from an oven somewhere. The smell is a map salt, heat, a nutty line where crust thinks about color. The night baker passes again, carrying an empty tray on his shoulder, his other hand deep in a pocket where a warm scrap hides. "All well?" he asks, meaning not only lamps. "Well," says the lamplighter, meaning both flame and street. They move on, each comforted by the other's ordinary promise. At a corner the wind returns to try a trick and fails for lack of allies. He opens the small door anyway and trims the flame one hair narrower. Sometimes the right size is not a measure but a recognition. This corner, these walls, this bit of sky. He closes the door. Chalk leaves a tiny slanted mark, breath trimmed, that he alone reads later when memory is heavy with roots. He reaches the square where benches look larger by night. One bench holds a pair of boots, toes pointing east, as if they had walked there by themselves and then rested. He sets the loose glove he rescued earlier under the boot's tongue, where a morning handwool discovered and believed the city returned it. He lifts to doors, inspects mantles through glass without opening, and decides the fog has thinned enough that no more inner wiping is kind. A cat walks the backs of the benches like a line on a staff. The cat knows where lamplight pulls warmest, and does not waste steps. On the bridge the lamps write their neat punctuation along the dark sentence of water. He lets himself pause midway, not to admire exactly, but to adjust the pace of his thoughts to the river's speed. A barge far downriver moves as if it were in a book being turned slowly. He checks the mica he set earlier at the cracked pane. It sits where he left it, crisp and quiet. He smiles, a thin line of approval meant for no one in particular. The round begins to fold back toward the yard. He passes the gaswork slow iron sheds with ribs, brick walls the color of toasted bread, a chimney that does not brag. Inside, through a high window, he sees the nightman's shoulders and the slow drift of steam. The pressure gauge needle is where it should be, half dreaming. He touches the pipe once with the back of his hand. It hums the note of contentment he recognizes. At the ledger box near the pump bracket he writes the last neat signs of the night. Crescent pane cracked, mantle renewed, temporary mica set, south lane to trends, fog cleared. Square inner wipes enough, the pencil, tied to its string, moves with a practiced economy that would please a schoolmaster. He adds the hour and a line below it, a small fence so that tomorrow's entry will know where to stand. He turns toward the yard by a path that shortens only by kindness, not by trespass. As he goes he looks once more across a long vista river, bridge, warehouses, the far row of lamps. It reads as a paragraph that does not hurry, the lines even, the spacing patient. He remembers 3 posts in his chest, the cracked globe, the desk corner, the pane with putty that held. He carries those forward like stones in a pocket that ensure a coat hangs in the shape it was cut. At the yard he opens the shed door with the quiet key. The small cup at the tip of his pole still holds its faithful flame, small as a bean. He turns the little shutter and lets it starve. It goes out without complaint. The pole hangs on its hook, weight remembered. The key ring rests on a peg. The pouch empties of chalk stub and oiled rag, both go to their places. Mantles remaining are counted by touch, not to doubt, only to greet the next round. A paper lies on the bench tomorrow's route, the same dance steps with a couple of parters changed. He writes mica pane for number 11 Crescent at the top so the morning lorry will not leave without it. He washes hands in a basin whose enamel knows more nights than his coat. Coal smell leaves the lines of his fingers. He dries them on a towel that remembers every job in the yard and remains content. From a little pot he pours a cup of tea that has grown to the right temperature without supervision. He drinks standing, then sets the cup upside down to say done. Outside, the lamps he lit now belong to themselves. They do not need him until the hour of dousing, when darkness will return as carefully as light was given. For a short while the city is in its most companionable night. A watchman tracing a known square, a baker feeding a second batch to letters begun at windows where pens do not scratch loudly, a cat folding itself and forgetting a whole afternoon of window ledge politics. The lamplighter pulls the shed door mostly closed and leaves it unlatched, the way the night crew prefers. He walks home along a line of pearls he strung himself, pleased not by pride but by fit, the sense that a small job found the size of its evening and wore it well. The first gray of morning arrives like breath on a cold pang, soft, even and undecided. It touches cornices and roof lines, then remembers the street. Birds try a few notes and lose interest. The city has not woken, it has begun to consider waking. This is the hour when the lamps yield. The lamplighter's coat carries the night's small weather, the memory of fog, a little flower from the baker's sleeve, a thread from a rope at the bridge. He steps from the yard with the same pole and keys, but the flame at the tip sleeps now. Dousing needs no fire, only sequence and attention. He begins where he began yesterday evening at the outer square, so the thread of light unravels in the order it was woven. At the first post he lifts the small door, turns the key back, and listens for the sigh that is not quite a sound. The flame becomes the idea of a flame, then a shadow, then nothing. He leaves the door ajar for the length of a breath, the better to cool the glass, then lies it shut with 2 fingers. Chalk marks from last night's wipe, mantle, wind remain at the base. He adds nothing now. Dousing sets its own quiet punctuation. He walks a pace or two and then looks back, not to admire, not to check, only to let his eye read the street without that lamp. The corner keeps its shape. The scene between night and day stitches invisibly. Satisfied, he goes on. A side note belongs softly here. Sequence matters. To douse out of order would leave pockets too dark or bright. The round is a long, slow exhale. Every valve turned is breath leaving the city, and breath should leave kindly. At the baker's lane a lad stands with an armful of trays and a face that has known heat and sleep at the wrong time. He nods to the lamplighter as the lamp above them rests. Light enough, he says, lifting his chin at the eastern sky. Light enough, the lamplighter agrees, and the baker's boy grins as if this were their private weather report. A pane he wiped in fog shows a faint crescent from the cloth on the inside. He could make it vanish in a flick of the rad, but the day will own the glass now, and rain will have its say later. Some work prefers to be finished in daylight. He notes a tiny letter in his pocketbook, just enough to remind the morning crew to give that pane a friendlier face when they come with oil and putty. On the bridge the lamps look pleased to be relieved. Water below holds a long, cool gray. It will learn a sky soon. He douses the westernmost globe and waits. The reflection fades a heartbeat later, as if the river had to think. He moves lamp by lamp, turning valves that resist, then agree. At the cracked pane where he set mica in the small hours he lifts the door, shuts the flow, and leaves the mica in place. Daylight crew will bring the new glass. He marks the post with one calm triangle, again a sign that will carry easily to men who can read signs without waking their voices. A watchman comes to the bridge's crown and adjusts his cape. Quiet, he says, making the word mean peaceful instead of empty. The lamplighter nods. He has no report grander than that. In this work, nothing happened, is the best news one can carry to a breakfast. Back along the market street, he meets the constable stifling a yawn he refuses to own. They exchange a small look that says good round, good watch, and go on. Shutters wake one by one. The smell of apples leans out of a door. The lamplighter lowers a valve and hears the tiniest sizzle as a bead of dew meets warm metal. He leaves the door ajar a breath longer. Heat does not like to be surprised. He pauses at a post where his chalk-marked new mantle in the night. He opens the door only to look. The net rests like a white ghost of cloth, and will do so for many evenings if not scolded. He closes gently. At another lamp, where he trimmed for a gust, he turns the key with a smaller movement than usual, a courtesy to a mantle he asked to work harder. No one will notice such kindness, but the hand that does the work notices, and that is enough. The square wears dawn differently. Plain trees offer a pale lace of shadow. Benches know their own walnut color again. He doses the lamp nearest the bench that kept a glove. The glove is gone, boots that guarded it are gone, the owner's hands found both. He smiles at this tiny proof that light had a conversation with someone in the dark, and gave something back. He turns the next valve and considers how the square will look at noon, then decides that noon is not his shift, and lets the thought fall away. In the narrow passage where laundry showed itself as masks at midnight, he lifts to doors and turns to keys. The shadows of lines lose the theater of night and become laundry lines again. Someone coughs behind a shutter, informal, unbothered. He tips his cap to the wood by habit. As if the house could see, houses like habits, they hold them. Mew the gasworks. The yard opens like a mouth that has learned to talk in daylight. The pressure gauge inside shows a needle a little lower than before. The night breath is leaving the city gently. He enters long enough to place the pocketbook on the foreman's table and add 3 neat lines in the ledger. Dust by root, mica on crescent, to pains to be renewed when warm. One inner wipe desired on market pane. He squares the pencil under the word done. A side note belongs here. Small writing done cleanly allows the day to begin without questions that pull at sleeves. Back outside, he turns to the last lamps, those along the outer square he started with in darkness. The sky holds a first pale blue, thin and sincere. He opens a door, turns the key, breathes the breath he has been holding since midnight without knowing it, and lowers the door. He steps back 2 paces and reads the corner again. The city's own light has arrived. Windows, sky, puddle, stone. Lamps are no longer needed. They do not sulk, they rest. He walks the length of one street once more, not to test or count, but to let his feet erase the night's route from their muscles so the day can fill them. He knows where cobbles lift, where the curb turns indulgent. The smell of coal gives way to bread to soap to the unremarkable air of a day that plans nothing dramatic. Cats become ordinary again. Newspaper boys will give the lamps no thought. That is all right. The lamps prefer to be forgotten until evening. At the yard shed he hangs the pole, cleans the little cup that kept the flame, and lays the keys to rest in the place where afternoon hands will find them. He folds the oiled rag and ties it with string, chalk stub inside. The pouch returns to its nail. He washes at the basin where enamel remembers many rounds and dries on the towel that refuses to become tired. He looks once toward the city not to own it, but to thank it for accepting his sequence, and turns toward home with a pace that reads as ordinary. Behind him, the street holds the memory of light the way a page holds the memory of a sentence read before sleep, for a few minutes, even without the lamps. Here seems to glow with the idea of them, then day rearranges everything for its own uses. And the round belongs wholly to last night until dusk asks for it again. And as the last pearls of lamplight fade into morning, let us follow the quiet paths of dawn into narrow Edo alleys, where wooden yokes creak softly, lidded buckets balance on shoulders, and steady hands keep a humble, vital cycle between town and field. Dawn writes a pale line along tile eaves, and the lanes of Edo remember their shape. Paper screens brighten by slow degrees. A Norn curtain stirs once, and then forgets to move. From a courtyard where buckets live in good order, to workers step out, shoulders easy beneath a wooden yoke polished by years of balance. Foot traps are snug, sleeves are tied back with string. Their buckets have fitting lids held by simple crossbars. The wood smells faintly of cedar and rice bran. They begin before most roosters bother. The city at this hour prefers felted sounds, broom on stone, sandals learning their first distance, the low clunk of a gate. The men pause at a wash basin to wet a cloth and wipe the yoke's rests where they will meet the shoulder. It keeps the wood from speaking too sharply against bone. A small sack of bran rides in one man's sleeve, tied at the mouth. A brush roll and a narrow ledger wrapped in oiled paper tucked beneath the other arm. Nothing rattles. The first alley greets them with a clean line of doorsteps. Each house has placed a small signal where the post meets the scylla. Bamboo slip-turned outward door has left its covered pot just inside the gate. Agreements live quietly here. Some households pay in coin, others in rice, others by returning vegetables twice a month from fields downriver. The workers do not knock. They lift lids as one might lift a book that belongs in their hand. Inside each pot is not chaos, but a craft between house and collector. A layer of ash or bran sprinkled last night rests as a pale veil. It keeps flies uninterested, moisture balanced, and smell modest, sweet and sour like ferment beginning, more pantry than street. The worker loosens the crossbar, raises the lid only as wide as need, and sets it against the wall so wood will not learn a corner bruise. He tips the pot's content to his lidded bucket with a practiced pour and a hinge of the wrist that does not splash. A handful of bran follows through a sieve, a soft rain, a small bow. The lid returns, the crossbar closes. At the next step, a woman in a dark cotton kimono waits with a braid coiled like a quiet thought. She bows a little deeper than the first house might require, and offers yesterday's small note on paper tally of guests so the ledger will not be caught short. The worker copies the note by brush, his strokes neat and dry. He swallows the nib once on the brush's hairs, and closes the book while the ink still remembers to shine. The brush and book return to their oiled wrap. The woman sets aside a bundle wrapped in cloth. Radishes, when you pass on the return, she says, meaning the exchange. He nods. Arrangements here are calm and long-breathed. Night's offering becomes field's food. Field answers with what it grows. The yoke takes its first weight. The carrier bends, fits the curve, rests to the soft place at the neck where shoulder and back agree, and rises by the rhythm the pole prefers, An inhale, a lift, a small settling of balance that walks down the spine and teaches the legs how to go. The buckets hang a little low at first, and then higher as gait learns them. Slosh does not happen when lids fit, and pace is steady. The men keep to the lane's middle where stones are most honest. At the corner stand to neighbors with brooms, sweeping toward each other without trying to finish the world. They nod not to the men only, but to the order itself, city and field shaking hands before the sun has made any claims. One of the neighbors taps a pot with a knuckle. The sound is hollow. It will be ready tomorrow, not today. The worker marks the ledger with a small circle open, meaning skip, and draws a dot inside when the householder promises a filled pot in the evening. The book is light, the meaning is heavy enough. They turn down a lane that smells of soy and summer grasses, where a tofu maker has already rinsed his cloths. A gate stands half open. A child peers around it and then disappears, not afraid, only puzzled, that a day can have work before breakfast. The worker lifts a lid, sprinkles bran, and leaves a tiny twist of straw at the pot's edge to show his partner this house has been seen. The system uses tokens rather than voices at this hour. Voices carry, tokens sit and wait. A soft aside belongs here. EDO's waste did not drift away without purpose. Farmers downriver bought it by contract and by measure. Barges wore low in the water, not with lumber or stone, but with what households offered. The city stayed cleaner than many of its size. The fields ate well. Rice behaved as if thanked. It was not romance, it was rhythm. 2 more alleys, and a turn bring them to a small back courtyard where 3 pots sit in a row like drums. The lids are new, bound with thin hoops. A man with a joiner's apron leans against a post, watching with the calm interest of someone who likes to see good joiner used. He mentions that a neighbor lost a lid last week. The ring cracked where dry sun met old wood. The worker notes a mark shaped like a little gate on his page, the sign to bring an extra lid on the afternoon pass. He tips the first pot. The sound is a thick, well-behaved note. The bren covers what would rather not be looked at. The bucket receives, then rests. Balance matters, and they tend it without discussing. When one bucket grows ahead of the other by a plate's worth of weight, the carrier stops, bends a knee a little, and lets his partner tip a comfort into the light side so the yoke will ride true. They change shoulders every few streets, not because one complains, but because both prefer equal duty by noon. They keep their eyes down when stepping from sun to shade. Stones change their mind and thresholds. A public water point meets them, where a lane opens to a canal. A bamboo pipe pours clear into a basin cut from stone. They set down the yoke on its short legs and lift the lids a hand's breadth. One shakes a last sift of bran within each bucket's rim. The other rinses the cloth and wipes the outside rings and handles so no tacky memory clings where hand will later grip. Clean practice here is not a sermon. It is a habit that makes later work smooth. A boy arrives with a gourd and stares at the lids. The worker sets a single droplet from the pipe to the boy's palm. The boy laughs at cold and runs away holding the brief coin of water. Down the bank a boatman in a straw hat loosens his mooring rope and nods at their approach. His flat-bottomed boat knows this canal and the wider bends beyond it. He has lined its deck with planks edged by shallow boards to cradle buckets, where they will ride without tapping. The workers pass loads aboard as if passing bowls at a family meal, one hand from each, so sure, a tiny pause between. The boatman sprinkles bran in the narrow between places where the boat's boards meet the bucket feet, a courtesy to smell and to later scrubbing. He sets a plank across the boat for them to walk and balances it with his toes. He has done this in rain and in cicada heat. The ledger opens once more. The worker makes 3 small lines at the page's edge: first run, first boat, first tide, and dots them with the tip of the brush. A thumb fans the page to help dry. The paper receives the marks as if expecting them. The wrap returns around book and brush, and the roll goes under his arm again. He lifts the yoke for the return walk, lighter now with lids tied to knock less if they forget themselves. By the time they retrace their steps, screens have opened to let him cool. Someone sweeps water across a threshold and draws a wet fan on the stone. It darkens and then fades. A kettle begins to sing, not loud, not yet. The men stop twice more for small pickup spots with an early lid, a guest left behind a promise, and leave tokens where afternoon will want reminders. A thin stick laid sideways on a lintel means pay and rice. A twist of straw near a post means bring vegetables per the note. The city's handwriting needs knowing at this hour. Back at the courtyard, the boat is already pushing off, stern swinging, bow nosing toward the broader canal that will learn river language soon. The boatman raises his pole and eases the boat into the slow, green path that wraps the city. The workers hang the yoke by its cords on a peg to let wood forget the memory of weight before the next route. They rinse lids and set them in a roll on a shelf where sun will behave later. One of them loosens the tie on the bran sack and refills it from a tub. The bran is sweet and dry, saving more trouble than anyone needs to speak of. The ledger lies open on a low table, ink dry to the finger. They drink water that has considered the night and now enjoys the morning. The first run sits well in their back and shoulders, not heavy, not careless. The city has given what it had, the fields will answer in their turn. Work pauses just long enough for breath to sit and for a little steamed bun to disappear. Then the yoke will go up again. Lids will lift and fall. Brown will rain softly. The day will teach its middle. The canal broadens at a quiet bend, and the water changes its voice from alley to field. Banks turn from tile and stone to reeds and low willows that enjoy seeing themselves. The boatman guides his flat craft with a pole and light corrections of heel and toe. Buckets ride into tidy rows, lidded crossbars snug, the dusting of bran like pale sand along the boards where wood meets wood. A dragonfly inspects the lids as if reading labels, then loses interest and drifts toward a lily pad that has business with the sun. Out here the city is still present, but at arm's length. Its roofs lie behind the trees as a line, its chimneys as short notes. In front of the boat a patchwork of small fields takes its place, rectangles bordered by raised pots, ditches that move water with the patience of hands, scarecrows that have learned to be kind to crows by ignoring them. Beyond a low ridge holds pines that keep their own counsel. The boatman lets the craft kiss a mooring post and holds it there with the gentlest push of the pole. He has arrived at a foreign gate that is not a gate at all, but a gap in reeds tied with a loop of straw, the sign that a receiving place lies within. Two farmers appear with shoulder bars and empty tubs that smell of straw, ash, and old rain. Their coats are short, their headcloths knotted carefully. They nod to the boatman and to the city's buckets with equal courtesy. The exchange happens as if passing bowls are on a low table, lid lifts, Tub angles, weight passes, lid settles again. A handful of rice bran falls through the sieve into each tub before it leaves the boat, the way someone might lay a napkin over warm bread. Flies keep their distance. Good habits make poor invitations. Off the path, a compost yard waits behind a willow screen. It is not a single great heap, but a series of low mounds in different stages of becoming, some quiet and cool, some humming under straw hats, some nearly soil with a dark, friendly smell that hints at seaweed, ash, and summer rain. The receiving tubs arrive and tip into a trench where chopped rice straw lies like a dry bed. A rake moves through it, mixing layer with layer so no corner hoards strength. A scoop of ash follows, saved from cooking fires to temper acidity and keep balance. A little water from the ditch, lifted with a half barrel on a rope, makes the mixture think kindly of blending. Work is slow and exact, not loud. One farmer kneels to check yesterday's mound by hand. He sinks his palm into an opening no wider than a handspan and waits. Warmth meets skin alive but not impatient. Steam does not leap. The heap is not a kitchen. It is a bed teaching itself summer. He lifts his hand, rubs thumb and forefinger together, and looks at the dark smear left behind. He knows by feel that straw needs one more layer before they cover. He sprinkles bran as if offering grace and makes a small sound to himself that means, good. A side note settles here like a sparrow. Recipes for such heaps were never only writing. They were palms, noses, and eyes trading news with piles that changed day by day. A younger helper slices reed mats into lengths and lays them across a fresh mound so rain will arrive politely. Over that, he spreads a thin jacket of mud and chaff using a wooden trowel that remembers many seasons. The coat is not for weight. It is a conversation with air breath in, breath up measured by straw and clay instead of iron and brass. In winter, coats grow thicker. In summer, they learn to be light. Today's coat sits somewhere between. Payment settles with equal gentleness. A ledger board hangs from a beam under the eaves of a small shed. Pegs along its length were sliding wooden counters. The boatman nudges a counter from owed to settled. The farmer slides another for next week, and a third peg receives a small notch to say exchange in radish and greens after the next new moon. A child standing nearby watches as if the board were a theater. The small wooden pieces move with the gravitas of actors. When the child reaches toward a peg, a parent's quiet finger appears. The child withdraws the hand and nods without offense. The board has been obeyed for so long that it feels like furniture that speaks. Back at the boat, the emptied buckets are rinsed with ditch water, and a splash of infusion kept in a jar water that has sat with bitter herbs. The rinse is not perfume, it is prevention, a way of discouraging small, lively things from making home where they are not invited. Lids go back with a polite click. Crossbars settle with their cradled sound. The boatman shifts one plank by a thumb to keep the center of gravity honest. He does not look at his feet. His feet know. Another gate, another yard. In this one, compost lives higher and warmer. Steam draws thin lines in cool shade. A farmer there uses a long, pronged tool, half fork, half paddle to turn an older mound from outside to in and to out, so every bit gets its day nearer the heart. He hums, not a song, just a three-note pattern he uses when counting. The turned face shows a dark brown that crumbles when pressed. Straw has forgotten its edges. The scent is the clean ancestry of soil. He smiles with the mouth only and sprinkles a little lime from a gourd, where the texture asks him to. He is not obeying a book. He is speaking with his pile in a grammar he learned at his grandfather's knee. A pause invites a small bowl of tea that tastes faintly of roasted stems. The boatman and the workers drink into quiet swallows each. Conversation is as light as steam. Whether a memory of last year's early rain, a reed mat that did not hold and had to be persuaded. No one mentions unpleasantness. The craft makes it unnecessary. A polite aside belongs here. To many outside, this trade sounded unlovely. To those within it, the work smelled of balance ash, straw, river, and a human promise kept. The boat moves again, this time along a straight reach where willows step aside, and the sky grows wider. A heron walks the far bank as if inspecting the law. The buckets, now polite and hollow, knock only when boards forget themselves. Twice the boatman touches a mark carved into a mooring post with the pole water height noted there for years. Today's level sits between two old scars, enough for boats and ducks, not enough to worry fields. He nods at the river as one nods at a neighbor. By midday the first run's buckets have learned the path to two receiving yards and are already thinking of the city again. The boatman brings the craft against the quay's worn step. The workers take the yoke from its peg, the wood now cool again, and settle it to their shoulders. Lids line up like obedient hats. Ledger and brush come under the arm. The alley back into town narrows from reeds to walls and offers shade the way a tree would. The men step in rhythm with the yoke's memory heel soft, toes attentive, the yoke rising and landing on its invisible beat. They pass a shrine the size of a cabinet. A woman there leaves a pinch of salt, and to bow-shaped radishes bound with straw. The men bow without stopping, not because they seek good luck, but because habit keeps balance 8 ways, not 2. At a corner a merchant leans over his threshold to ask if the afternoon bundle might include a little compost for the courtyard fig. The worker promises a sack from the cooling edge of a heap, figs like patience, unlike gourds. He marks a tiny fig leaf shape in the ledger's margin, a private shorthand that saves his brush from long remarks. The merchant smiles at the drawing as if granted a favor. Drawings on pages feel kind in towns where words often work harder. Before the second round begins, there is a moment of still. Water at the public spout runs a little slower now that more hands have asked it to go elsewhere. The men refill the brand bag, tie it, and pat it so the powder will pour gently later. Lids are stacked to the height of a thigh along the wall to dry fully. The boatman, setting out for the next receiving yard, lifts the pole and pushes off, leaving a thin V on the surface that forgets itself almost at once. The city keeps waking while they step back into it, shop shutters folded and pinned, laundry poles set, a dog deciding that shade is wiser than duty. In a kitchen, rice rinses until the cloud in the water runs thin. Near a bridge, a boy practices balancing one empty bucket on each end of a stick the length of his arm, laughing when the stick decides its own ideas. A neighbor shows him how to look not at the buckets, but at the spot on the ground ahead where he means to arrive. The boy tries, steadies, grins. Somewhere inside that grin, part of this morning's craft finds another home. Noon gathers itself over the patties the way steam gathers above a kettle thin first, then full enough to be seen. Dikes hold their clean limes. Water mirrors sky, and dragonflies so closely that looking and being looked at begin to boor. On the receiving ground behind the willow screen, The mounds breathe with a low, steady warmth. Straw jackets keep their shape. The air smells of wet earth, ash, and a sweetness that belongs to things deciding to become soil. The farmers open one heap with a careful cut. A bamboo shovel slips under the straw coat, lifts it back like a blanket, and lays it aside without tearing. A long, two-pronged fork follows down, lift fold, as if turning a futon to air it. Outside comes inside, inside goes out. Steam rises just enough to fog a forearm hair. One farmer reaches in with the back of his hand, not the palm, to test warm, not scalding. He leaves his hand there for a count learned from a father. The heap should hold his hand for that count, and no longer. It does. He smiles a line meant only for the mound, and sprinkles a little ash where the straw glints to bright. A lad ladles ditch water with a gourd, and the fork answers with a small listening pause, then turns again. A quiet aside belongs here. There were no thermometers in every shed, yet the body kept a tidy scale back of the hand for heat, nose for edge, ear for the small fizz that says working, eye for the crumble that says nearly. Recipes lived in the arms, not just in the head. At the trench, new matter meets chopped straw and layers no thicker than a hand. Bran falls from the sieve like soft snow. A pinch of lime at the edge persuades a balance that pleases roots later. The calling of flies is answered not with scolding but with covers reed mats laid like tiles, mud brushed over with a wooden spatula, a shawl for patience. The coat is thin today. When stands still, heat will do the greater share of talking. Where wind does creep along the ditch, a fence of cut reeds leans into it and slows it to a polite pace. Past the yard the rice fields show their own rhythm. People in cool cloth bend to press seedlings into patties that mirror the sky. The line of young plants makes a music of tiny greens across silver water. At the levee a worker lays a narrow rope of almost soil-cool compost from the edge of the oldest heap, pressing it with the heel of his hand into the damp border. Roots will find it later when water lowers. He shakes loose crumbs from his fingers into the water. Little fish nose at the new dark and approve with their bodies. The boat returns to the receiving gap with the shape of a short V behind it. Buckets ride a second set in their places, lids snug, crossbars laid. The boatman speaks the farmer's name softly, habit, not necessity, and the same exchange repeats. Weight passes, bran follows, ledgers speak without paper. To counter slide from promise to at hand, and a third moves to after next rain. The child who watched earlier returns with a reed whistle and plays one note twice each time a counter moves. No one corrects him. Even ledgers can like accompaniment. By early afternoon the canal settles into a nap. Cicadas begin a steady embroidery from the willow's shade. The workers from the city walk their lanes back toward the courtyard, yoke light, lids stacked along the wall to dry, bran bag tied. They eat rice and pickled cucumber in 3 slow mouthfuls each, drink water that has learned the bowls cool, and sit with their backs against plaster while shoulders forget weight. The ledger lies open in the patch of shade that moves like a polite guest across the floor. Their brush has made short drawings, fig leaf for the merchant's courtyard, a little gate for bring a lid, 3 dots together for first tide complete. Ink has dried to the soft shine that means safe to close. Afternoon makes stones warmer and voices smaller. In the alleys, signals appear again, a turned bamboo slip, a lid skewed to say ready, a twist of straw on a latch. The men take up the yoke, the wood rests where the neck prefers, the first steps reteach the body its exact center. When a lane narrows to a shoulder's width, they turn sideways and slide the load with a movement that does not wake the buckets. At a threshold, a small boy salutes the yoke with 2 fingers in the air. His sister copies him with 3. The man with the ledger makes a tiny crescent by 1 name guest left at dusk, so tomorrow's visit will honor a bigger pot. Evening's second harvest differs from the dawn's first in color and in mood. Pots are a little fuller, lids a little warmer, ash a little more abundant where dinner fires have done their part. The pour is the same tip hinge, no splash, but the bran falls more generously, a powder cloak for night. A woman waiting with a pail mentions a cousin coming from the country. The brush writes a small notch on the page as if for a tooth, the sign for more for 2 days. A noodle cook leans from his shop and asks with a grin whether radish tops could be traded for a scoop of old, cool compost for his gourd patch. The worker promises the cool ed's the kind that does not scold young roots and sets a square mark beside the noodle man's name. Squares mean cool. At the public spout they rinse rings and handles again. The water has lost some speed to evening's many errands, but it still answers when cupped. A woman with a basket of greens arrives and dabs 3 drops of spout water on her wrists. She says the heat clung today. The men agree. Someone has tied a bundle of thin kindling under the eave for anyone who needs it. The bundle leaves half of itself by habit every night and becomes whole again by morning. Gift and taking share a ledger that requires no pegs. The second boatload meets a lower sun and a wider mirror on the canal. A heron stands in the shallows as if part of the bank. Swallows cut the air like needles pulling thread. At the yard gate, the receiving farmer's face is streaked with a gentle dust that could be ash or satisfaction, or both. He lifts tubs with a quiet sound and sets them where the trench expects them. The warm heap gets its turning, the cool edge gets its gift to the noodle man. The board takes 2 more counters to settle. The child with the whistle is now asleep on a mat. The reed whistle lies against his cheek like a kind finger. A soft aside finds its place. Some towns later would break this rhythm. Pipelines forward, factories of a different sort yet for a long, patient span. Edo moved in a circle that pleased both nose and root. The circle was work, not tale. That is why it lasted. Back in the city, lamps that belong to paper and oil rather than gas begin to wake one by one. Lanterns hang under eaves and make small squares of honey on the stone. The collector's own courtyard learns a dim glow from a single lantern hung near the ledger table. The men sort lids by the rings, voice to ring for sound wood, dull ring for a crack wanting a new band. A pot with a stubborn hinge receives a drop of oil the color of tea. The yolk gets a wipe with the damp cloth where it meets bone. The bran jar is covered with cloth and tied so mice will be discouraged from becoming scholars of the stuff. Before closing the book, the worker adds 3 tidy notes, a little triangle by the gate farmer's name. He turned to remind himself to expect warmer tubs tomorrow. A circle half blackened, second tied lower, to adjust timing. A slanted mark like a reed, wind shifted because covers may ask for an extra hand if weather. Sniffs at edges in the night. He blows on the ink once, not from need, from habit. The book closes with the softness of paper greeting paper. They eat the last mouthfuls of rice with a pinch of pickled plum and sit until the lantern learns to be less shy. Night makes the alleys narrow again. Signals go back inside. Dogs decide to remember house duty. Somewhere a storyteller begins a tale that mentions a river and a moon, and then forgets to end? The men set the yoke on its peg where wood will sleep straight and quiet. One runs a hand along the lids in their row, counting not by numbers, but by the feeling that all are present. The canal can be heard thinking through reeds. The day has given enough and taken what it should. Heaps warm and cool in turns, fields and pots have both spoken and listened. The second harvest sits where it will become first food. Work will ask again at dawn, the body will answer with the same small bow under the yoke, and the ledger will wake to short signs that keep the circle calm. Rain arrives first as rumor cool air walking ahead of itself along the canal, willow leaves turning the pale side upward, a swallow's stitch in the sky and picked mid-flight. Then the first drops come large and far apart, punctuation with no sentence yet. Buckets already sit ready, lids understand their role. The yoke rests on shoulders that have known damp mornings, and keep their balance as if water were only a slower sort of air. In the alleys, signals move indoors at turn, bamboo slip replaced by a bundle tied just inside the threshold. A pot that usually waits by the post now sits under the eave where drips cannot meddle. The men touch each gate with the back of the fingers, more habit than need, and lift lids in shorter arcs so the rain does not borrow the pot for itself. A handful of bran falls in a thicker veil, its dry breath keeps edges from learning to cling. The ledger travels wrapped in oiled paper, and opens under a lintel where the brush can think without weather. Marks still appear neat, but the ink shows a darker contentment, pleased to have a roof. By the public spout a woman sets a jar to catch rain as if it were a visitor with news. The men rinse handle and wring with the spout's thinner stream, and leave to drops of lamp oil on a hinge that complained yesterday. Rain has a way of magnifying small sulks. A boy's sleeves rolled above his elbows, claps his palm to the stone basin and laughs at the chill. His mother's look is both warning and permission. The middle line where childhood rests. In the courtyard by the canal, the boatman studies the surface the way a potter studies glaze eyes half-lidded, attention everywhere. Rain dimples the skin of the water, dimples neat, and become a fine grain that moves like thought. He slides the boat along the quay and lashes a low screen of reed across its windward side, not a wall, a courtesy. Boards on the deck wear a dusting of bran to discourage slickness. He tests the pole's foot on the mud below. It answers with a firm, unhurried push. The boat will keep its footing. Under the oiled cloth, the ledger notes shift slightly to match weather's pace. A small slanted line by 3 names says later, a circle darkened half and says ready but sheltered, and a tiny umbrella, drawn with the point of the brush and nothing more, means bring cover for the fig soil. The mark makes the worker smile. A page can be a friendly face in damp work. Rain learns steadiness, then softness. The fields beyond the willow screen welcome it with the sound that padded cloth makes when folded. No splash, only a thickening of quiet. At the receiving yard, covers on the mounds are double-layered today. Reed mats overlap like scales, coats of straw and thin mud smooth with a wooden spatula that leaves a grain like the wind over rice. Where yesterday's coat was a jacket, today's becomes a cloak. The edges are weighted with stones that have lived near the shed for years and know where to sit without being told. Tubs come from the boat like bowls from a shelf, one at a time, to hands each, no hurry. The trench accepts them, with a sound more like pouring tea than like an argument. Straw waits below to keep rain from gathering in corners. As shakes down like a small blessing. The rake's teeth speak a slow language. folding and inviting rather than shoving. A farmer tests the new layer's temper with the back of his hand. As always, rain has cooled the skin of the world, but the heap remembers yesterday's warm talk. He nods, and straw returns to roof the mound. A side note takes a seat here beneath the willow. Rain can be friend or fuss. Too much weight wakes smells that prefer to sleep, and water that lingers where it ought not turns kindness to sulk. So the craft answers with coats, with straw that spans, with small trenches that carry excess away, and with patience that refuses to hurry the heat within. Balance is not a rule written on a board. It is the conversation between drop and hand, pathware new brightness. The boat glides slower, keeping to shallows it knows like an old proverb. The pole's foot tastes for clay, not silt, and the boatman leans as little as he can over the edge. Rain makes backs thoughtful. Under a willow bough he pauses so the men can shift a bucket farther from the rail. A thumb's width that will decide whether a puddle forms or not. Rain increases for 3 breaths, then rests. The boat takes the opportunity to kiss a mooring post with only the politest bump. Payment on days like this prefers tokens that do not mind damp. The farm's pegboard stays indoors. A smaller travel stick comes out than bamboo with 2 strings tied along it. Wooden beads slide along the strings. One string means received, the other owed in greens. Beads move, click, click, like to distant pebbles. The child with yesterday's reed whistle now wears it on a cord, and has learned not to play under roofs. He taps his toe instead, satisfied that beads can make music too. At the heap that runs hottest, the farmer slips a slender reed down into the center and holds it there, then draws it out and touches it to his upper lip, warm, not cross. The reed holds a drop of dark that smells right. He adds a pinch of ash as if finishing a dish with salt, and draws the reed through a bundle of straw to clean it. He rests it on a peg where rain cannot reach. Some tools sleep better under cover. The return into town is a study in edges. Doorways extend their welcome by a hand's breadth. Shop cloths hang lower to protect the threshold. The yoke rests in a slightly different place, an inch toward the neck to smooth a wet shirt's friction. Buckets do not offer opinions. They ride in obedience to pace and level ground. Pots are heavier from a day's use. Lids are slicker. The hand moves slower. Bran falls in generous whispers. The ledger receives the same neat marks as always, but the brush waits 1 heartbeat longer above the page, so drops from the eve will choose not to join the writing. At the public spout, someone has tied a strip of cloth to the bamboo pipe so the stream runs down it and does not splash. The men rinse rings and handles along the cloth. The water goes where it is intended. A neighbor arrives with a square of folded paper and a small knot of coin inside, already wrapped against the day. She sets it on the ledger table and bows for the afternoon service, which her cousin had promised to pay. The worker slides it under a stone that makes a good paperweight when weather wishes to gossip. He draws a short line in the book, no number, just a sign in his own alphabet that means promise kept. The second boat leaves under quieter sky. Rain has backed away to the distance. Drops fall from willows on their own schedule. The surface of the canal shows a lighter grain. Dragonflies resume appointments. At the receiving yard, the farmers lift lids in tubs with sleeves tied higher. A hat with a split reed brim sheds to little rivers away from the face. The newest heap receives its cover more snugly than morning allowed. Stones return to their assigned places. A long board laid across a trench becomes a bridge for 3 steps. then leans to rest again under the eave. A small aside lives comfortably here. Some towns and other places let rain decide too much, bins overflowed, ditches sulk, noses complained. Edo's habit of ash and bran, cover and cloth. Lifting and rinsing as ceremony rather than chore kept weather as partner more than tyrant. It is not romance to say so, it is only the smell of good sense. Evening comes in a clean cool after rain. Roof tiles brighten, then dull as they dry from ridge to eave. The collector's courtyard gathers the day and improves it. Lids stand along the wall with their edges toward air. The oak leans where breeze will remember it. The ledger lies open under lamplight with 3 new marks, a short ladder for covers doubled, a crescent shaded in for tide slow, and a tiny droplet by to names where payment came kind and early against weather. The brush writes a fig leaf too. The merchant's tree will receive its cool soil tomorrow morning when roots are calm. Before closing, the men spread the damp cloths for drying and rub a pinch of oil into the yoke's rests. Water and shoulders agree better when wood keeps its kindness. One checks the brine jar's lid twice because weather invites small night visitors. The other loosens the tie of his foot trap, then readies it as rain's softness leaves the fibers less obedient. They eat rice with pickled eggplant and listen to the drip from the eave grow shy. Somewhere a storyteller finishes last night's tale with a tidy knot and begins another with a moon that appears despite clouds. Laughter travels, but not far. By the time the lantern learns its smaller flame, the day's circle has held a little slower, a little more attentive, a little more cover laid where needed. Heaps breathe, fields think about tomorrow's roots. The city sits cleaner than it would have if rain had arrived without an answer. The boat, tied under a willow, nudges the key twice and then rests as a sleeping animal does when it finds the shape of the night. The wheat folds itself along a clean crease. Morning opens with a sky that has finished with rain and returned the air to ordinary. Buckets stand in their row like bowls awaiting tea. Lids lean to sun with their edges outward so light can find the places damp prefers. The yoke rests from its peg with a posture that says soon, not now. In the ledger, yesterday's marks have dried to the soft mat that resists a careless thumb. The brush sleeps inside its soiled wrap, hairs aligned as neatly as reeds on a roof. The first round is light households that keep early hours, a bathhouse that likes a clean start, to guest pots that ask to be seen before breakfast. The men move with the small thrift that comes after several good days. Steps choose smoother stones without looking, lids travel in shorter arcs. Bran falls without dusting cuffs. A woman at a doorway offers koan wrapped in paper printed with a single plum blossom. The worker slides it under the smooth weight that always sits on the ledger table and draws a gentle mark in the book, his private plum, so the page will remember how the promise was kept. By the canal the boatman checks his pole for a stubborn splinter and rubs it with a rag until the wood agrees to be kind to hands again. He taps the side of the boat with the pole's heel. The sound rings true. Planks are dry where they should be, damp where they must be. The first load comes aboard with the same care as always. Lid up, weight across, lid down, a breath between. The boat pushes off, leaving behind it a V that folds itself closed after a short thought. Willows observe and do not comment. At the receiving yard, counters on the pegboard complete their little journeys. One bead slides from ode to settled, another travels to after new moon. A third remains where it is because a field has asked to rest. Fallow has its own ledger entry. The child with the whistle is awake and has learned a quieter game. He moves a bead one space and returns it, learning the idea of promise without cluttering the week. The farmer lifts a mat from a matured heap and presses his palm to the top. The warmth is nearly gone. The scent is soil's calm voice. He smiles a narrow smile meant for root and rain. Some compost has come to itself. It leaves the yard in deep baskets carried by two bound in netting so it will not fall back into pattern. The farmer lays a rope of it along a border and pats it with the flat of his hand, the same gesture used to quiet a folded quilt. He keeps a small sack aside, the cool edge asked for by the noodle cook, the scoop promised to the merchant's fig. Settlements in coin and in greens visit side by side. A bundle of mizina tied with straw, a short string of coppers that have learned to be discreet, a nod that means we are even again for now. Back in the city, the last 2 days signals thin. Bamboo slips are turned inward, twists of straw disappear from latches. The ledger's page for this week nears its lower edge. The worker makes his marks a fraction smaller to leave room for a note to self, a tiny ladder for covers off by third day if weather holds, and a reed drawn at a slant for wind returns from river by evening. He writes a single dot beside 3 names where gratitude arrived and asked gifts of pickles and sweets placed quietly on the ledger table. While he lifted lids and did not see, tools meet their end of week courtesies. Rings are wiped with cloth that has known only clean jobs, not the vat. Hinge pins receive a breath of oil. The yoke's rests are rubbed with a thumb dipped in a paste of rice water, and a whisper of oil so wood will remain kindly to skin. Lids are sorted by their voices, a clear ring for soundwood, a duller answer for a hoop that wants changing. The cracked hoop is laid aside with its replacement, a knife and a small hammer sit ready. But the fixing waits for the hour when hands are not carrying other promises. A side note takes a seat on the shelf. When tools are unhurried, they give back double. The second round rides smaller streets. Pots that played guest during the week are checked and returned to their ordinary pace. A tea master's house asks what the bow for the quietest are tomorrow. A dot with a circle around it enters the book before visitors. A family has received a baby. The women inside pass news into the lane as steam does from a roof vent. A mark like a small sprout appears by their name, not for the book, but for the memory of. Handing in a scoop of cool soil later to press around a courtyard bamboo that will now accompany lullabies. At the public spout, a neighbor has set a flat stone to widen the place where feet find purchase. The men nod as if the stone had spoken. Rings and handles are rinsed in sequence. The cloth tied to the bamboo pipe has learned its job so well that drops behave. A child offers a folded paper boat to the canal as tribute for a week that stayed tidy. The boat, having accepted its purpose, agrees to point toward the receiving yard and goes on without instruction. Afternoon draws a soft line across eaves. The boat returns with its last empties. The boatman leans the pole where wood forgets to warp. He counts buckets by weight and sound rather than number. The receiving farm settles accounts as simply as a breath. To counters click, a little jar of coppers changes hands. A basket of greens travels in the other direction. A second yard accepts a promise for next week in the form of a string tied with a particular knot. The knot has a name that only the families along this stretch use, and the name does the work of 3 sentences. Back at the collector's courtyard, the ledger's page receives its last strokes for the week. 3 small bars for the week's 3 rains, a tiny sun for 2 days of drying lids, and a narrow gate where a replacement hoop is planned. The brush rinses in a shallow dish of clear water. The water darkens to tea shade, then rests. It will be carried to the herb bed. The brush lies on its side so hairs will not learn a bend. The book dries under a like weight, and then closes with a sound like a breath remembering itself. They set the yoke across the pegs that keep it true. Buckets are nested large over small so air moves easily. Lids stand in their row with their grain vertical to remember straightness. A small pot of oil and the knife sit together. The cracked hoop will be replaced after tea when the body is more patient than clever. They eat the last of the rice with shavings of dried bonito and a little pickled ginger. First meets water from a jar that kept its shade throughout the day. As the sun leans, thanks move both ways and ask for nothing in return. A neighbor leaves 2 cucumbers on the ledger table with a sprig of shiso and an embarrassed smile. The men set aside a scoop of cool compost for the noodle man as agreed, and for the merchant's fig soil that feels like velvet to a finger. A farmer's boy arrives with a note on a thin piece of wood, a list of counters to slide on Monday. He bows as if this were a hidden poem and runs back. The city has grown clean along its edges. The fields have grown certain along their rows. The ring between them feels tested and intact. Dusk places a hand on the courtyard. A single lantern lifts its small square of honey onto the ledger table. The yoke casts a long line along the plaster wall. The canal's voice is a low ribbon. Somewhere a storyteller ends a tale with a knot that pleases the listeners because it is not clever. The men wash their hands at the spout and leave the last drops for whatever small creature comes after. They tilt the bucket stack a finger's breadth so air can pass in the night. The gate is pulled nearly closed and left to breathe. The week has said thank you to itself. Counters slid, hoops mended, lids dried, heaps warmed and cooled, roots prepared, rice certain. Tomorrow we'll open the same quiet book and ask for the same few lines. The hands that answer know where each word goes. Now these quiet stories will keep you company as you rest. Thank you for listening, and may your night be easy and unhurried sweet dreams.